sit atop the waves, so far from open arms. Oh, this mist, these fog, these north winds, give him something to cling on. Jura, 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 won't you save your best for me? Jura, 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 oh, 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 oh. Join the sky to the sea. Oh, oh, oh. Join the sky to the sea. Drum sits untouched on the side. Another girl will sleep alone. Oh, these rocks, they're calling. Yeah, they're calling you home. Jura, 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 won't you save your best for me? Jura, 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 oh, 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 oh. Join the sky to the sea. Oh, oh, oh. Join the sky to the sea. All this water I wash away. All this water I wash away. All this water I will wash away. All this water will wash away. Oh. All this water rising up sweeps you down into the day. All these words you left unspoken build a harbor for regret. Jura, 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 won't you save your best for me? Jura, 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 oh, 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 oh. Join the sky to the sea. Oh, oh, oh. Join the sky to the sea. Oh, oh, oh. Join the sky to the sea. Whoa, oh, oh. You join the sky to the sea. Whoa, oh, oh. You join the sky to the sea. You join the sky to the sea.
Thank you. Cheers, guys. There's Gareth Icke. He's the living proof that good voices are not genetic, because you don't get it from me. I've been known to clear a room with karaoke. Okay, we're going to go to some strange places now. This is Krishnamurti, Jiddu Krishnamurti. If we can really understand the problem, the answer will come out of it, because the answer is not separate from the problem. What you kind of get is people, what you might call the New Age arena, I've had over the years, who say, you shouldn't speak about that, it's negative. Well, I don't think knowledge is negative, ignorance is negative, because when you're in ignorance of what the problem is, then you can't do anything about it. So I think knowing what's going on is quite important. But in this section, we are going to go into some strange places, to say the least. Just to reiterate the problem, we've got disconnected from the full magnitude of who we are, isolated in the five senses, thanks to the bamboozle that's been set up to hold us in perceptual servitude and created the madhouse. And now the question is, who's behind it or what's behind it. And this is where we go into some strange places. This is a lovely quote. Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. That's the program. And it's a big mistake if we're going to understand what's going on in the world, especially when we come to this bit, which is, how do we get there to this Hunger Games society? Total human control. We hide the real controllers, which is what has been happening through known human history. Who is the spider? What is this force and source that's driving all this? Well, it ain't them. Here today, gone tomorrow, politicians, different parties, same party, it doesn't matter, it's not them. No one who ever does this job, even as the so-called President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, yeah, okay, yep, I'll believe you. Nor is it even the corporations. And a lot of people say it's the corporations. It's not. The corporations are not the origin of this control and this centralization of power. They are a vehicle for it, not the spider. And it's no one who's sitting around a table apparently making the decisions in the public eye. Those you see are only gophers for those you don't see. You can go deeper into the rabbit hole, away from the people you see, into the advisors. It's not them either. You can go even deeper into the rabbit hole, and you can find the Rothschilds and people like that. We are the Rothschilds. You don't see us, but we control your life. Well, yes, but only on one level. They're not the origin either. So who is the spider? What is the driving force? Mark Twain said, truth is stranger than fiction because fiction is obliged to stick to perceived possibilities. Truth isn't. The truth doesn't change because you don't want to hear it. And the postage stamp consensus is currently in an ambulance heading for emergency because it's heard what I'm going to say next. And this is as far off that postage stamp that you could possibly imagine. So it's in intensive care until I've finished. So are we ready? Are we ready? Who is the spider? This takes us into this next level of the rabbit hole, which is a level of non-human intelligence, which is ultimately, well, I say ultimately, there might be levels beyond that, ultimately, as we see it now, behind what's going on in the world. All these different areas of human society of control, secret societies, politics, banking, Satanism, pedophilia, military, media, religion, it all in the end ends up leading to one place, which is this spider, this force, which is not human. Okay, yes, I can understand that to an extent. I have a question. But hold on a minute. We live in an electromagnetic spectrum that's 0.005% of what exists in the universe, so mainstream science says, and we can only see a tiny fraction, visible light, of that electromagnetic spectrum of 0.005%. If you take the projected size of the universe according to mainstream science, then the Earth, by comparison, is 1/billionth of a pinhead. I feel it in me water. I think there's other life out there other than us. Honestly, I do. I'm convinced. This is, again, it's like, take a deep breath, look at it again. It's freaking obvious. It's like, do you think the sun affects our temperature? Oh, yeah, okay. Our consciousness, this is Bernard Carr, professor of mathematics and astronomy at Queen Mary University, London. Our consciousness interacts with another dimension. Our physical senses only show us a three-dimensional universe. What exists in the higher dimensions are entities we cannot touch with our physical senses. They're on different frequencies. And these non-human manipulators, visitors, from other dimensions of reality have been described in many and various ways by different cultures all over the world. The serpent gods, the Chitahuri and the Zulu belief system, the children of the serpent, The Anunnaki, Sumer, Babylon, Snake Brothers, Hopi, Star People, many and various. They're called demons in Christianity, interdimensional entities. The Gnostic people I'll come to in a second called them Archons, and the Islamic, or actually the pre-Islamic world where it originated from, called them Jinn. And these are entities either that are manifesting within our reality, our visible light frequency band, or manipulating from outside of that visual frequency of perception. And the different ways, I say different ways, the common ways that they are described, many of them very, very compelling in different cultures and belief systems, they are clearly describing the same force. Like the Archons in the Gnostic belief system, as they call them, they said of the Archons, they were made from luminous fire, and they kind of create with luminous fire. And the Jinn are said by the Islamic world to be made from smokeless fire. And the way that they are described, they're clearly describing the same entities, the same force. Now, the Gnostics, I've got very interested in them in the last few years. The Gnostics were not a race, even a people. They were a belief system. They were a perception system. And whenever they got into a place and started to communicate this perception, this knowledge, it's what Gnosis means, knowledge, but a certain kind of knowledge, they were persecuted by the Roman Church who sent the boys in. So it was the Gnostic perception system that was running the Great or Royal Library at Alexandria in Egypt, this fantastic depository of ancient knowledge and ancient historical awareness knowledge, which was destroyed in pieces, in sections, in a sequence over a period by the Roman Church. And the most significant one, the most talked about one, happened around 400 AD, just after. And the Gnostics, when you see what they were saying, you can see why the Roman Church wanted to destroy them. And the Cathars in southern France were also, in the same way, Gnostic thinkers. They had a perception of the universe that was what the Gnostic belief system. And the Roman Church sent the boys in, again in stages, and eventually destroyed them in the public arena at the siege of the castle of Montségur in 1244. Now, it seemed that what the Gnostics believed had been lost, the detail of it anyway. But then, in 1945, a sealed jar was found, an earthen jar, at a place called Nagamani, about 70, 80 miles north of Luxor on the Nile in Egypt. And in that jar was found to be a pack of writings, codices, manuscripts that were put there by the Gnostics. It's estimated around 400 AD, which kind of would sync with the destruction of the Great Library at Alexandria, which was around 415, I think, as I recall, AD. And so suddenly there were writings which described what the Gnostics believed in detail, and they had the great benefit of, because they were in an earthen jar all that time, they couldn't, like other religious writings, be played with and changed to fit the authority of the day. And 1/5 of these writings found at Nagamani talk about something they call the Archons. Just their name, it's a word, means rulers. That's why they call them that. And they said that they were manipulating human society from the unseen and were responsible for basically creating the world of what we call physicality. Now, what I found fascinating from my point of view about the Nagamani writings is that I came to them quite late, just a few years ago, which was very important for me, because if I'd have come across them earlier, they can become a one-stop shop belief system, which they have for some people. But by the time I came across them and read them in detail, I'd come to conclusions as a result of decades of research So when I'm reading them, I'm thinking, well, this is unbelievable to me, because this is what they're saying is what I've concluded. It was a confirmation, a very detailed confirmation of what I concluded was going on. And in these Nagamadi writings, they describe something called the silence, what I would call, Ibn Alexander would call the dazzling darkness. The silence, what I experienced, the place of all potential, all possibility, the field of possibility and probability waiting to manifest, the silence. And I experienced it as the silence, so I can understand where that word came from. And the other thing about these ancient writings, and writings like them in religion and in ancient cultures, is they only had, as I said earlier, the symbols and analogies that fitted the society of the time. They didn't have computers. They didn't have Wi-Fi fields. And so what we're looking at are descriptions using the symbols of the time. We can now update them. But what the Gnostics also called the silence was the father of all. They were trying to get across in a simple way the creator of all. Not a man with a beard on a throne, the creative force of all, the father of all. And this is from one of the Nagamadi texts, talking about this silence. He is an incomprehensible one, but it is he who comprehends all, and nothing exists outside of him. But all exists within him, and he is boundary to them all, as he encloses them all, and they are all within him. There is no place outside of him. He's describing all that is, has been, and ever can be, the force that drives all things. But they said, and this is so the really massively relevant part to the world that we live in, they said that the silence was the creative force, but there was a fake God which had created this reality that they call the physical world. They said the physical world is a prison created by an evil fake God. Spirit, awareness, as I would call it, is entrapped in the body. Salvation, escape from this entrapment, comes from knowledge or gnosis of self and reality. And gnosis is knowledge, yes, but it's not knowledge, names, dates, places knowledge. It's knowledge of reality and how it works, that kind of knowledge. And they said the kingdom is invisible, which is true, because that which is beyond this reality is invisible to us. Everything else that exists. Now, this physical world prison that they describe in their language, I call the simulation. We update it into modern language. They said that this force was this evil fake God had created and was responsible for the world we live in at a physical level and for entrapping people in the physical world. And they had various names for this fake God. One of them was the Demiurge. Another one was Yaldabaoth. It's also called Samael. This is the origin of Satan, the devil. And they said in these writings that the Old Testament God, Yahweh, Jehovah, was the Old Testament name for this fake God, which also was called in the writings Lord Archon. Again, where we get this whole theme of the Lord from in the Old Testament. Now, you can see the correlation between the Nagamadi writings and their belief system, which hadn't been touched while it was in that sealed jar, and what you see in the Bible. One of the Nagamadi writings says, talking about this fake God, I'll call it Demiurge, opening his eyes, the chief Archon saw a vast quantity of matter without limit, and he became arrogant, saying, "It is I who am God, and there is no other power apart from me." And then if you go to Isaiah in the Old Testament, "I am the Lord, and there is none else. There is no God beside me." The correlations are quite blatant between the two. So Nagamadi Gnostic writings described this Demiurge, this prime force of manipulation, as the blind one, blind to the spiritual world, disconnected from the greater picture, but understanding certain levels of reality in a way that it could manipulate and control. Now, this fake god, this Demiurge, they describe the Archons as the formless ones. We're not talking about something in form. We're talking about a state of awareness, a very highly distorted state of awareness, an imbalanced, inverted state of awareness or inverted frequency from which it seeks to pull everything into that same distortion. Now, a perception can be a panorama, so you see this vast panorama, or you can be in a pitch black room. It's still a perception, but it's a completely different perception. And this distorted perceptual state that they call the Demiurge or the Archons is a state of awareness that is without harmony, without wisdom, without heart, without empathy, all the things that the people running this world don't have, and there's a reason for that we'll come to. Now, one of the things we need to get away from is the fact that life, consciousness, awareness has to have 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, and a head. That's just one form of vehicle for awareness. You can have pure awareness, you can have expanded awareness, you can have heart-centered awareness, or you can have what we call evil awareness, which is a vast distortion of harmony. So some scientists now are looking at this whole idea of what pertains to be life in a different way. This is a mainstream headline: Is alien life everywhere? Radical theory claims it may have become part of the fabric of the universe. He was talking about maybe our laws of physics are actually this kind of alien consciousness. So we're starting to get away from this idea of, the human form is the only way that intelligent life can operate. It can't. And I watched the whole series of this called Through the Wormhole, fronted up by Morgan Freeman, on the Science Channel, where they were looking at, it was mainstream scientists, but to be fair, they were looking and asking questions about the big picture, the big questions. And they were looking with more sympathy on the fact that maybe the postage stamp doesn't know it all. And they asked the question in one edition, one program: are digital aliens hiding within technological systems? Because the digital level is also a state of awareness. And it's a state of awareness that can manifest and can make things happen and can take control if it's in the right arena. And this is a guy called Christoph Adami from Michigan State University. He said in that program, we can define life in terms of informational processes. So life and awareness and what we call forms of consciousness take many and various expressions, infinite expressions. And thus, we're not talking ultimately about somebody in a form, although they do take form. We're talking about a distorted awareness that's behind all this. So the Archons in their base form are a chaotic, imbalanced, inverted state of awareness, thus frequency. And the Gnostic writings talk about how the fake god, the Demiurge, made copies of itself. So the Archon Demiurge became the Lord Archon of the Archons, which were basically like, the way I see it anyway, it's like Agent Smith in the Matrix. It's a program, it's a software program, and there was one of them. And then it made loads and loads of copies of itself, and there were endless then Agent Smiths, all acting the same and looking the same. This is the theme that I'm talking about in terms of the Archons. They were copies of the original distortion. So I'm using the word Archons here in this section as a name for the many and various expressions of a deeply distorted and inverted awareness, because it does take many expressions, some of which I'll come to. So the Nagamani writings said of the Archons and the Demiurge, Lord Archon. Archon, as I said, means prince, ruler, authorities, and from the beginning. They say that they've been here from the beginning of this world because they basically were responsible for it. They say that the Demiurge is a fake god that created our physical or material reality as we perceive it. Gnostics related the Demiurge to the Judeo-Christian Yahweh Jehovah God, and they said that the Archons were inorganic. They did not result in and come in what we would call a natural way, inorganic, not resulting or produced by growth, artificial. When in our language, they're saying that this is a form of artificial intelligence. By the end of this section, that will become very, very relevant. They describe the guardians, the Archons, as the guardians and the gatekeepers. The guardians are the gatekeepers of humanity going into a state of expanded awareness, holding them in that lower state of awareness, because then they could control them. In expanded states of awareness, they cannot control, and thus they want to stop us from going there. The writings say that the Archons sought to overpower humanity in its psychological and perceptual functions. That's exactly what I've been talking about all day, how the manipulation of perception is how the control system works. They said the Archon agenda for humanity is creating fear and slavery. Well, that's again what I've been talking about all day. That's what's happened since this hijack took place. And if you look in the Bible, you'll see kind of indications of what I'm talking about here. Here's one. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, both names that actually mean Archon in that language, against the powers of this dark world and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly, unseen realms. They said in the writings that the Demiurge and the Archons have no creative imagination and envy humans because we do. They describe them in our language like cyborgs, a robotic race that can imitate but not innovate. They called it counter-mimicry. In simple terms, if you gave this archontic awareness a blank sheet of paper, it wouldn't know what to do with it. It couldn't create on it. But you give it something on the paper and it can twist it and manipulate it to suit its agenda. They described how the archontic awareness was expert in fantasia, creating illusions that the target population think are real. They describe them as mind parasites that possessed human perceptual processes, that they were experts in deception. They were called the deceivers, and also in inversion. And this is the key. They describe them in our language as a form of artificial intelligence, a robotic race artificial. That's big time important, like I say later on. Now, the other thing they describe in the Nagamani writings is something called Hal, which in the Coptic Egyptian language they were written in is what we would call simulation, creating illusions, virtual reality that people believe to be real, and how they were experts in it. Now, the Gnostic said of the Archons, they make something appear to happen that does not happen. They can induce a virtual reality experience, using our language, of course. And the Islamic and pre-Islamic world said of the jinn, they can manipulate humans by creating illusions. We're looking at the same theme here and the same force. So, in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. This manipulative force is very, very limited in what it can do and what it can create. So it has to keep the target population. It is actually trying to absorb, I'll get into that at the end of this section, in a lower state of awareness than it's in. And this is a classic description of the situation we're in. In the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. This force is symbolically the one-eyed man, and it's made humans blind so the one-eyed man can control. Once we become the two-eyed, three-eyed, third-eyed human, again, expanded awareness beyond that, it's over. But not until, and that means breaking the program and letting go of all these belief systems that hold us in servitude. The archontic writings of the Gnostics also say that the Archons made a bad copy of the original reality. And they say the bad copy is where we are now, this world. Again, he's back. Bad copy, what you freaking talking about? Well, what am I talking about? With a bad copy of original reality? I'm back to the simulation. What the NASA scientist described when he said the universe is a digital hologram and may have been designed by a non-human force. Well, it had to be designed by a non-human force if it wasn't designed by humans. And so we're looking at this simulation, a bad copy. What is a computer game, a video game, a virtual reality game? It is a bad copy of this reality, in effect. We're talking about the same principle. What they say in these writings is that the real world, prime reality, is described in terms of being the upper eons. This is the place of spirit. This is a place of pure awareness. And they say we live in what they call in the writings the lower eons. They call it a shadow world, which is, they say, a reflection of the prime reality, a bad copy, in other words, of that original reality, which of course still exists. And we can interact with it when we open our five sense minds to consciousness. So what we're looking at, we're talking about bad copies, and we're talking about different worlds. We're talking about information sources. That's what we're talking about. Because just as in this world, we think it's a world, but we are decoding an information source into the world that I've described that we think is outside of us, but is inside of us. What happened with this bad copy is one information source was replaced by another, the simulation, and humans started to decode and experience the simulation as if it was real, because they were decoding it in the same way through the same senses. You can decode one information source and then decode another, and your experience is dramatically different, but they both seem real. Nagamani text Origin of the World says, now the eternal realm, the eternal eon, the upper eon of truth has no shadow outside it, for the limitless light is everywhere within it. But its exterior is shadow, which has been called by the name darkness. From it there appeared a force presiding over the darkness, and the forces that came into being subsequent to them called the shadow the limitless chaos. The word chaos is used again and again to describe the actions of this archontic force, which is a chaotic, distorted state of awareness. Yaldabaoth, the Demiurge, in other words, these writings say, created the lower eons as an image or reflection of the upper eons. This is the simulation, I'm calling it. In relation to the reflection which he saw in it, he created the world. With a reflection of a reflection, he worked at producing the world. So what they're describing is pure awareness in a higher frequency realm of what they call upper eons, the realm of spirit, and this reality being a realm of form or matter. And they say, interestingly, that the upper eons are the realm of no time, and the fake reality is the realm of time, illusory time. So I'm saying they're describing the simulation, the fake reality. And, it's interesting, when you look at the Matrix, the person that created the Matrix in the movie was known as the architect. Well, the Freemasonic God is known as the great architect of the universe. And the Gnostics called the Demiurge the great architect of the universe. They're describing the force that created this reality. Not what we call God or infinite awareness, the creative force, but this distortion created this distorted reality. Now, where is the Matrix? It's in our heads. It's in our perceptual decoding system. And therefore, if we are locked in only to the frequency of the Matrix has completely got control of our perception of reality. When you expand your awareness, you still experience the Matrix on one level, but you can see and perceive beyond it, and thus you start to see where you are. You're starting to see the maze now. They don't want us there. This is why they're terrified of this information. So the heavens is an information matrix, the fake matrix, the simulation, and a massive part of the manipulation of this matrix is coming from the moon and is coming from Saturn. I've wrote about that in detail. I do in Everything You Need to Know But Have Never Been Told, and earlier books. And on the internet, if you put into YouTube or my website search engine, the moon is not what you think it is and Saturn is not what you think it is, you'll see a detailed presentation of that side of it. Now, this Old Testament God, this architect, said, let there be light, and created the world in all these 7 days, was it? Create the world? It must have been quick. But what did the Gnostics say? The Old Testament God was this demiurgic force, this fake God force. And the more I've looked at this over the years, it's become very clear to me anyway, that what's being described in the Old Testament in Genesis is the creation of the simulation, not the creation of the world. Let there be light. Now, let there be light. We talk about light and the fact that we live in a frequency of light, and, I'm opening to the light. But what is the light? Well, the light is radiation. And we live in a radiation matrix, an electromagnetic spectrum matrix. That is not the light that the Gnostic writings describe about the upper eons. They describe a very different light. They describe in the upper eons a watery light. Infinite awareness in awareness itself is not the kind of light that we experience here. And of course, the light we experience here is the light based on electromagnetic communication, just like computers communicate. And I'm saying that what we call light, the electromagnetic spectrum and within the speed of light, is actually the matrix. And thus, what the Gnostics describe in terms of this archontic force, that they are luminous fire and create with luminous fire, the more I look at it, luminous fire is this radiation, this fierce light. Matrix light, simulation light, luminous fire, blinded by the luminous fire, blinded by the light. It's not the light that's described elsewhere. And what the Gnostics are describing is very, very similar to Plato's, the ancient Greek philosopher's, allegory of the cave. When he's describing reality that humans experience in these terms, he describes how prisoners are chained up in a cave so that they can only see one wall. And there's a fire behind them, and there's people walking past this fire. And as they walk past this fire, they're casting shadows on the wall. Now, these prisoners can only see that wall and can only see the shadows, and to them, those shadows become real. They become the reality that is real to them. That becomes the real world. Plato even describes how some people became expert on the shadows. And he was describing what we call academics and scientists who become experts symbolically on the shadows without realizing what they are, thinking it's real. Then one guy in this allegory breaks away and gets outside the cave. And he suddenly realizes, hey, there's a whole new world out here. It's not like that. We thought it's not just the shadows. And he goes back and he tells the other people still chained up, hey, this is not real. This whole world out there. And they go crazy. Shut up. You're mad. This is the real world. That's exactly what happens here. It's a brilliant allegory. And this is the human cave. Human cave. Blinded by the light. Plato said, those who are able to see beyond the shadows and lies of their culture will never be understood, let alone believed by the masses, because although it's changing, my God, thank goodness it's changing more and more. Most people are still blinded by the light and the program. So the upper eons, infinite awareness, are beyond the program, and the lower eons are this level of frequency in the simulation that's holding human perception in servitude. John Lam Lash, who wrote a book called Not in His Image, which is all about the Nagamani writings, said this: although they cannot, talking about the Archons, although they cannot originate anything because they lack the divine factor of enoia, he calls it intentionality, I call it creative imagination. Archons can imitate with a vengeance Their expertise is simulation, HAL, virtual reality. The Demiurge fashions a heaven world copied from the fractal patterns of the original. This is the copy they're talking about. His construction is celestial quiche, like the fake Italianate villa of a mafia don, complete with militant angels to guard every portal, the guardians, the gatekeepers. Downloading the fractal patterns of the original universe. This is the simulation of the original reality. And so this reality appears to be going forward, but actually is going round and round and round and round, holding human perception in this servitude. And because we come in and out only for a small portion of this cycle, we perceive everything's going forward, but it's not. It's going round and round. And work, buy, consume, die. Work, buy, consume, die. The Matrix. That's what we've got ourselves into. So this scene in the Matrix movie is absolutely spot on. Because we are downloading, decoding this Matrix all the time as the scene went. Morpheus said, the Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. What truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Absolutely spot on the human condition. So we're looking not at a human world, we're looking at an Archon world, or a human world that's being turned into an Archon world. And of course, once this simulation was made manifest, they needed to manipulate the human interconnection with the Matrix in a way that the interaction could take place, and we would experience it as real, the real world. And all over the ancient world, including in the Bible, they describe this process of the gods manipulating human genetics to change what they were before. And these various, and the interbreeding between a non-human force and humans. And for me, this was creating a vehicle that would interact with this fake reality and decode it as the real world that we perceive it now. This is the most famous line in relation to that in Genesis, although you find this theme all over the ancient world, in all religions and no religions. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men and there bare children to them. The same became the mighty men which were of old, men of renown. All part of this Genesis, this description of the creation of this fake reality. And in the Nagamani writings, you see the same theme as in the Bible. This one says, and the angels altered their appearance into the likeness of their husbands, and their husbands sated them with the spirit, which molested them in the darkness out of wickedness. They took them and begot children out of darkness through their counterfeit spirit. It closed their hearts. They became hard by the hardening of the counterfeit spirit. They were changing human perception, the way that people decoded information into perception. And it happened, well, certainly there was a point when it clearly happened, big time, which I'm going to come to. So we're looking at this chaotic, imbalanced, inverted state of awareness, thus frequency, what the Gnostic writings there described as the counterfeit spirit, the infusion of this into the human energetic field. And when I describe this consciousness awareness as a distortion, that is defined as the act of twisting or altering something out of its true, natural, or original state, which is exactly what this archontic force is expert at, not creating from nothing, but manipulating and twisting what already exists. Now, it's very, very possible, in my view, that what the Gnostics call the counterfeit spirit being infused into the human form and the human perceptual processes actually is what the original sin is all about, described in the Bible, being born with original sin. So form is information, and if you're manipulating human form to lock it into an interaction with this fake reality, you don't need to go down the road of procreation, as we would see the creation of a new genetic type. This is a scientist who proves that DNA can be programmed by words and frequencies. Why? Because words are frequencies. Russian scientists have changed frog embryos to salamander embryos simply by firing at the frog embryos salamander embryo information fields. And it has changed the nature of what they became. There's also a whole new area of science now called epigenetics, where they're discovering that human thought, human perceptions, environmental influences switch on and off genetic functions. So you don't even have to change the hard drive, as you would describe it, to change the nature of the human form. You don't have to mutate it by mutating the hard drive. You just switch on and off certain functions, and certain perceptual states do this. And what they found, which is the key to it, is that once those perceptual functions and genetic functions are switched off or switched on, what they call silencing when they switch them off, that is then passed on to the next generation through procreation. And the form has changed, the perceptual processes have changed. So what we're looking at now is creating Generation Snowflake, and then the next generations are born Generation Snowflake. This is how epigenetics works. And if you can change the DNA at the waveform level, then the so-called physical level of the body will change as a result of that. What I'm saying is you don't have to use procreation to transform the human body and how it interacts with this fake matrix. So they've been turning the human body, or tuning the human body, into this matrix by manipulating it. And of course, once you start downloading or interacting with this information field, as we see with computer games, it becomes extremely real and becomes, well, this is the real world. Just like I'm describing, the upper eons are one information source and the lower eons are another information source. You just have to tune the target population into the one you want, which is this. And so as this distortion started to gather, human life, human behavior, the human world started to change. Because as the distortion was happening at the waveform level, which is where it operates from, it was coming through into the world of the seen in all these things, allowing people to die of hunger in a world of plenty, wars, conflict, selfishness. It all started to manifest in the human form. And they describe in these Gnostic writings of how this demiurgic force, as I would call it, is destroying unity and balance by creating chaos. Again, chaos. Archons they described as the demons of chaos. And you see in some of these sci-fi comic stories, there's one in Doctor Strange, this dark force called Damamu. I say that's symbolic of the Demiurge, whether they mean it or not, of the dark dimension, envoy to the Lord of chaos. And what is the great way already discussed that the world is manipulated and pushed on to this Hunger Games society through order out of chaos? Create the chaos, offer the order out of the chaos, which leads to more chaos. That's what the Gnostics were describing. That's what we're describing today. So this manipulated human form was locked into this fake reality and disconnected as much as possible from prime reality and an influence by it. And so we went from expanded awareness human to 5 sense human. And the world changed dramatically. Another Nagamani text, and they steered the people who had followed them into great troubles by leading them astray with many deceptions. They, the people, became old without having enjoyment. They died not having found truth and without knowing the God of truth. And thus the whole creation became enslaved forever from the foundation of the world until now. And you can symbolize very accurately this demiurgic distortion as like a computer virus, a self-aware computer virus, which infects, distorts, and brings under its control all the operating systems that this virus can infiltrate. And this self-aware virus is fear. There's so many writings about the time fear came into the world because it didn't exist before. This is when fear came into the world. And the Demiurge is the prime virus, the Archons are the virus replicated, and they are expressions of the frequency of fear. Fear was brought into the world. Now, the computer virus is trying to infect humanity and pull it into its frequency and thus absorb it into itself. And it's making a very good job of parts of it already. And when you look at techie websites of how a virus works, a computer virus works, it's just as the Gnostics describe the archontic manipulation. This is from a techie website. A virus is a small piece of software that piggybacks on real programs. Doesn't create them, piggybacks on them. Similar to the way a biological virus must hitch a ride on a cell, a computer virus must piggyback on top of some other program or document in order to launch. Counter-mimicry, twisting what already exists. Once a computer virus is running, it can infect other programs or documents, which is what has been happening. A computer virus can damage files, slow the system, show messages. This is the key. It can take control. And so if your hardware, computer, printer, etc., started acting up on its own without you requesting any action by means of keyboard or mouse, you are likely having a virus in your computer system. And that's what I was describing earlier. This is the manipulative force, the virus, that is pulling people into five-sense reality, disconnecting an influence from expanded reality so that the computer level, what I call five-sense mind, takes control, makes the decisions, and becomes the perceptual reality of the target population. It is about disconnecting the thinker through this virus, through this distortion, from the knower. And that leaves Phantom Self to go about its life believing that is what it is. Now, if you look at the Avatar movie, whether they meant it or not, it very much does describe the kind of world that is described as before this hijack took over, what they called the Golden Age, the great age of humans. And that was when they had an expanded awareness. They knew that everything was connected to everything else. You see the scenes in the Avatar movie where they're communicating with animals and communicating with trees. This is what we're supposed to do. And also, interestingly, they talked about infiltrating the Navi Blue People Society by taking on bodies that look like them, which is what I'll come to soon. Now, this Golden Age society is what you would call a heart society, as opposed to the head and gut society, which we have now. When I say heart, I'm talking about the heart vortex, what they call in the East the heart chakra, or the wheel of light, the vortex. The major chakras through the body, and the heart is the key, the balance point. This is where we feel true love from. This is where we feel intuition from. You look at the body language. When people say, I'm thinking, I'm in five-sense mode. I'm thinking. But where do our hands go when we say, I just know? They go here. I just know. Because this is where that knowing is coming from. It's a heart society. And there's an organization in America called the Institute of Heart Math, which focuses on researching the power of this heart vortex, this heart point of perception, this heart intelligence, innate intelligence. And they say that there is new data suggesting that the heart's field, which is the biggest electromagnetic field in the body comes from the heart, is directly involved in intuitive perception, I just know, through its coupling to an energetic information field outside the bounds of space and time, outside of the matrix. This is why they want to shut the heart down and put us in the head, because this is in the matrix, this is connected to out of it if we open it. So the now, as they describe the upper eons, is outside the bounds of time and space. The heart makes that connection. That's why they want to shut it down. They've also found in experiments that if the heart field, electromagnetic field, the brain and the central nervous system are in energetic frequency coherence, as they call it, that person goes on to a higher level of expanded awareness. And when that coherence between the three is broken, then people fall into a lower state of awareness and perception. And so the more they can create frustration and anger and hatred and conflict and fear, the more that distorted frequency breaks that coherence and people are held in a lower level of awareness. When we open our heart and go into a state of harmony, we go into an expanded awareness. And they don't want that to happen. And the great inversion of this hijack of human perception was when we stopped interacting with the world from the heart, love, and started interacting from here, emotion, fear, and from thought, the computer. And so they say in the Nagamani writings, they took them and begot children out of darkness through their counterfeit spirit. It closed their hearts. They became hard by the hardening of the counterfeit spirit. Close the heart down. Brings you into five-sense reality. So when we have what we call a heart-to-heart connection with someone, it's dramatically different in the way we communicate, the way people treat each other, the way people understand each other, than when we have a head-to-head connection, which is about apartness, not unity. And so the knower, with this hijack of human perception, the knower became thought and emotion. Very different state of being. Disconnecting the droplet from the ocean, five-sense mind from infinite awareness. That's the process that took place. Now, holding us there is the key to holding us in servitude and taking this control to the end game that they want. So, the Gnostic set of humans, they are sparks of, or droplets of the same essence of God, what I would call expanded infinite awareness, but became entrapped in their bodies from which they will eventually escape. And they will escape by expanded awareness, no other way. The real world keeps us from that escape, the programming of the postage stamp consensus. Now, the Native Americans have this concept of two wolves inside people, battling for control of perception. One wolf, they say, is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. The other wolf, they say, is joy, love, peace, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion. What I would say is that is human spirit. That is the counterfeit spirit. Which wolf wins, the Native Americans say? The one you feed the most. And we have been subjected to a society, still going, which is pushing us to allow that to be the one we feed the most, and not this. We're talking about love, talking about all such connected things is now seen as weak. Oh, you've got to be macho, you've got to be over there. Ooh. Which wolf wins? The one you feed the most. We've been feeding that the most, and that's why we have the world that we do, which is a reflection of feeding that the most. We talk about people's dark side. I say that's the counterfeit spirit. And if you are in an expanded state of consciousness awareness with an open heart, that counterfeit spirit loses more and more and more and more of its influence over you. And infinite awareness takes more and more of the control of the perceptual sense of reality. And religions and ancient peoples, all of them, they have this common, constant, recurring theme of two forces tussling with each other for control of human perception, thus human behavior. Same thing. So why? Why? Well, there's many whys. This is one why. A virus, a computer virus, so symbolic of what I'm talking about, has no energy source, no power source. Its power source is that which it is infesting. It feeds off the operating systems it infests, takes its power from them. It's what we would call, in the human experience, a form of possession. And because this archontic force is not in the same way an expression of awareness, it's more artificial, as the Gnostics describe, it doesn't have this natural connection to an energy source, force, that consciousness in a state of connection to awareness does. And thus it has to create its own energy source to feed itself, to empower itself so it can then recycle that power against the target population. And I said earlier, this self-aware virus is fear. That's its frequency. And thus, if you're going to lock in to an energetic source of sustenance, it has to be within the frequency band you're operating on, or like two radio stations, they will never meet, and thus one cannot absorb the other. So therefore, the energy source of fear has to be fear. And what has been created with all the wars, all the suffering, all the death, destruction, is a source of fear and all its sub-frequencies, like depression and anxiety and hatred. And it's created an energetic source for itself by manipulating humans to produce in vast quantities the very emotional frequency energetic source that empowers it, then it can recycle it back against us. This is why people that worship this force, this distortion, what we call Satanists and such like, this is why they are obsessed with death. It's why this source is obsessed with creating fear, because they are energy sources. Death is a frequency. Suffering is a frequency. And therefore, they want as much of that as possible. A war, like a world war, is a banquet of this energy. Because this distortion cannot absorb that. It needs this, otherwise it does not get empowered energetically. And we have been manipulated to produce it. And so empower this force that is manipulating human society. So again, this scene in the Matrix was absolutely spot on, symbolically. When Morpheus held up the battery, talking about the machines, artificial intelligence, and said the Matrix is a computer-generated dream world built to keep us under control in order to change the human being into one of these. And I was sent a section of a book written by Rudolf Steiner, very deep esoteric thinker who started the Steiner schools, Waldorf education, I think they call it. And he died in 1925. And the book was in Austrian, and the person had translated the section for me, having read one of my books. And what I read, I had no idea he was saying this, but he was spot on. And remember, he died in 1925. He said this: there are beings in the spiritual realms, the unseen realms beyond human sight, for whom anxiety and fear emanating from human beings offer welcome food. When humans have no anxiety and fear, then these creatures starve. If fear and anxiety radiates from people and they break out in panic, then these creatures find welcome nutrition and they become more and more powerful. These beings are hostile towards humanity. Everything that feeds on negative feelings, on anxiety, fear, and superstition, despair or doubt, are in reality hostile forces in supersensible worlds, launching cruel attacks on human beings while they are being fed. These are exactly the feelings that belong to contemporary culture and materialism, because it estranges people from the spiritual world. It is especially suited to evoke hopelessness and fear of the unknown in people, thereby calling up the above-mentioned hostile forces against them. And this quote is spot on. When you dance with the devil doesn't change, the devil changes you. It pulls you into its frequency, this distortion. And everywhere I look, I see a program. The same recurring program, but it's got different names, and therefore it seems to be different. It's not. Like everything is born, it has a certain life, and then it dies. Born, grows, dies. Born, grows, dies. Whatever world, the natural world, the animal world. And why is a duck and an elephant if it's consciousness? Why doesn't duck act like an elephant? Why does an elephant act like a duck? Because the elephant is a biological computer program, and the duck is a biological computer program. And they are designed to process information in a certain way. And the processing of the information of a duck makes it act like a duck and perceive like a duck and live like a duck, and the same with the elephant. And the other thing you find about the program is it's based on the law of the wild, which operates in the human world too. Everything lives because something else dies. So everything is always in fear of what might happen, generating more and more of this low vibrational emotional energy on which this distortion feeds. And in this No Man's Sky video game, they say even the animals on the game's planets have unique behavioral profiles designed with a procedural distortion of archetypes that requires a sequence of algorithms characterized as a computerized pseudo-randomness generator. And wherever I look in the world, I see pseudo-randomness. Things that have different names and different labels, but when you break it down, they're all acting the same way. It's the same program, pseudo-randomness. And the human form is also a program which processes information in a certain way that makes people act like a human. We are the awareness having the human experience. We are not the human experience. The other thing that people ask is, why are they, different versions of what they believe to be they, why are they trashing the earth? Why are they causing environmental mayhem? Why are they filling the atmosphere with radiation? Where they have to live here? Well, who are they? It's being done because they're turning our world into theirs, in front of our eyes. When the so-called bad copy was made, basically a download of a simulated version of original reality, which still exists in another frequency band, they were making a bad copy, if you like, Gnostics talked about, of something that was beautiful, something that was wonderful. Something that was from the heart. And what's happened ever since is they've been manipulating this information source and manipulating humans to play a part in it to transform that original copy of original reality into a world that suits them. And therefore, the world is changing, and what is good for humans is being destroyed, and what is good for this archontic force and that which it takes form through is being introduced to replace it. Evil is quite appropriately live written backwards in English, because evil is an inversion of life. Evil is an inversion, distortion of life, an inversion of perception, and a state of extreme ignorance. And this is why the archontic worshipping networks of Satanism and the more close to the spider secret societies and the deep inner sanctums of secret societies are obsessed with death. They're obsessed with Satanism. They're obsessed with... that's why they do so many rituals in churchyards, because they're obsessed with the energy, the frequency of death, and they sacrifice people. And it's all to do with death, because that's their frequency. The global death cult. This is something of beauty. I must destroy it. You see, things of beauty to humans they're like that geometrical water crystal pattern that comes from I love you or thank you. That's beauty. And that beauty represents a frequency they can't absorb. They don't want beauty in the world. They want distortion. And that distortion they're introducing, we see as the destruction of the global environment, the destruction of the atmosphere. Dying out, wild animal numbers could fall by 67% up to 1970 to 2020 study says. This is part of this destruction of the world. If you take that to be symbolic of the original reality of which the original information download was taken, well, that, by contrast, is the Archon world. That is the Archon world. And that. You don't need creativity to build that. You need a ruler and a pencil. You know, you go around Maastricht. All the beautiful buildings where you go, oh, that's beautiful. They're all older buildings. New buildings, here, ruler, pen, that's eggs everywhere, straight lines. And another part of this is that Archons, Jinn, do take form through straight manifestation, just manifesting in this reality, which they can't do for long. It takes just so much energy. And by longer term, manipulating this reality by infecting or possessing other form. And this is where these bloodlines that run the world come from, but I'll get to them shortly. Now, these are some expressions of this distortion in form. What we call reptilian extraterrestrials, what we call the Greys in classic UFO lore, and in human form, what we call psychopaths, extreme psychopaths. That's the archontic distortion personified. When you look at how the Gnostics describe the Archons in terms of their perceptions, their behavior, their attitudes, it is classically the hair test, as it's called, of psychopathic traits. And if you have enough of them, you are designated a psychopath. Top of them all is no empathy, no ability to put yourself in the feelings of other people and what you make them suffer. This is why those running this world, in the world of the seen, can do horrific things like bombing Libya to destruction, all the death and destruction in Syria and Iraq, and have no emotional consequence whatsoever because they have no empathy. No remorse, ditto, no shame, parasites, they feed off the efforts of other people. Pathological liars, and doing whatever it takes to get what they want. There's the 1% for you straight away. And interestingly, the Gnostic writings that were estimated to have been put in that jar and hidden away around maybe 400 AD describe how this archontic force takes form through a reptilian form and by another form which they describe as like an unborn baby or fetus with grey skin and dark unmoving eyes. This is from 400 AD. And they're describing what people in the modern world have described entities they've interacted with, been abducted by, and all this stuff. And when you look at these abductions that are described by so many people around the world in modern times, and then you look at the religious writings and the other biblical writings of people being taken up into the sky by angels, taken up into the sky by gods and stuff, they're describing basically the same thing. And you know, this whole manipulation of human society through this reptilian, this these other archontic expressions in form have been going on while humans were knocking rocks together. Because they're not from this world, they're from other worlds manipulating this world. Thus, they're coming from a completely different base of knowledge and awareness and understanding of technology, which will become very relevant soon. This is a story from this week. NASA again accused of covering up UFOs seen at International Space Station. The number of these UFOs that are described all around the world, it's just extraordinary that it's not, on the front pages what is going on here. Now, of course, I've become ridiculed over the years. I don't care really. Or do I care? I don't know. By saying that the world is controlled by a reptilian force. But that reptilian force is merely an expression in form of this archontic distortion. That's why it operates psychopathically. And I've had massive ridicule, and people laugh and all that stuff. And I have to say that there have been times in the past when I've been hurt by it. I mean, I have laid in bed and turned over in the middle of the night thinking, how could they be so horrible to me? No, I haven't actually. No, that's true. I've not, because I don't give a shit. I'm only interested in what's going on. Not what people think of me. I think something else tomorrow. I'm not bothered at all. But as Einstein said, condemnation without an investigation is the height of ignorance. These people just condemn without investigation, so they're at the height of ignorance. I'll leave them to it. We should remember that normal is only what we normally experience, and we don't normally experience these entities, which want to stay in the background, because the less they're known about, the more powerful is the manipulation. And let's not forget, billionth of a pinhead against the universe. I think there's other life out there that doesn't look human. I feel it. And interestingly, this is a mainstream article. When someone who's a scientist comes out and basically says the same thing. Welcome to our lizard overlords. Studies suggest alien worlds could be full of super intelligent dinosaurs. I'm not saying it comes from dinosaurs, that's just the headline, but reptilian. And this story was done straight. Oh, he said this. Oh, that's interesting. And someone like me says it, you're mad. And when they have done studies, I'm not saying again it's come from the dinosaurs at all, but when they've done studies of where the dinosaurs would have evolved to had they not died out, as is said, then they concluded that they would by now be a two-legged, two-armed humanoid reptilian of an intelligent nature. And you see the symbolism of reptilians all over the world, it's particularly in the Far East where it's the major symbol, the dragon. And this one in the middle here is a painting by a guy called Credo Mutwa, he's a Zulu shaman, he's in his 90s now. I spent a lot of time with him a few years ago. And he talks about, in Zulu legend, of the Chitahuri, the children of the serpent, or the devastators. And this is a painting from ancient and modern descriptions of the worker class, he says, of this reptilian race that is manipulating human society as an expression of this archontic distortion. And these other two here come from a Spanish artist I met in Barcelona in 2010, who was into nothing of this stuff. Didn't have heard of me, hadn't heard of the information, nothing. But he had a girlfriend who was Brazilian, and he was in Brazil. And being an artist, he went out on his own into the countryside with his easel and his paints. And he said he was just painting the landscape when this craft come down. He described it at about 50 meters across. And there was a window open. Every other window was closed, he said. And it just hovered in front of him for quite a time. And these figures were looking out of him. Reptilian figures were looking out at him. And he started to paint them as he was looking at it. He said he doesn't know if he was taken on the craft, but he has no memory of it, not that necessarily would. And he painted these things. And he did a little book of the craft and everything. And when you look at what he painted, it's very, very similar to what Credo Mutwa also painted. And this reptilian race that is manipulating human society is part of a hive mind, and this archontic distortion is the hive mind. It is the perceptual hive mind to which they are connected. And as I'll come to later, they want to absorb the human mind into this, and that's what transhumanism is all about, but I'll come to that shortly. Now, long after I'd started talking about the reptilians and stuff, This article was published in a magazine called Nexus in 2011. And it was something called the Charney Project, Computer Interface Communication with Other Realms, which was claimed that it was written by a whistleblower talking about a project in Africa in what was described as like a mini CERN. And from 1994, it was said, they made a computer interface with another dimension and an entity in another dimension, and over 5 years asked it an enormous amount of questions. And I just read this just out of interest. I didn't know where it was going. And then it starts talking about reptilians. And it said the reptilian race was holding back humans so they couldn't grow. This is what the ancients said. The entity said they had fought many battles against the reptile race in their own reality. Humans were more evolved spiritually than the reptiles, but they suppress humans with their technology. Their God is their technology. That's going to be very relevant shortly. That is pretty much, in terms of the way we suppressed, what the Gnostics describe in their writings. And this is Carl Sagan, very famous cosmologist. And he was so convinced of the reptilian genetic impact on human behavior that he wrote this book, The Dragons of Eden, in which he was talking about the fact that you cannot understand human behavior without understanding the reptilian genetic impact of human behavior. Because people who laugh at the reptilian thing, they don't realize that one of the foundation parts of the brain is called the reptilian brain, or the R complex, and it's one of the fundamental parts of the brain. Part of the brain that basically is scanning the environment for threats to survival all the time. It's obsessed with fear. It fears everything. It's fundamental to human behavior. This is an article about it. How to make friends with your reptilian brain. Are we being controlled by your reptilian brain? Yes, we are. And it's been put there for a reason. It was part of the genetic manipulation. This is mainstream science describing the impact on human behavior of this reptilian brain. Cold-blooded behavior, territoriality, a desire to control, an obsession with hierarchical structures of power, aggression, might is right, winner takes all, and from there we get primitive emotional responses. Also, the reptilian brain, they say, is about protecting status, power, reputation, superiority, intellectual preeminence, and in another expression, acquiescence to hierarchy and authority. What they're describing about the character traits of the reptilian brain are fundamental to the way humans act, behave, and perceive. And you look again at the descriptions of the negative force in religious writings, like here in Christianity. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. You've got the Jewish holy serpent, or Leviathan, as part of their belief system as well. And in 1933, this Reverend John Bathurst Dean wrote a book called Worship of the Serpent, in which he was looking at the worship of the serpent all over the world, because it's a common theme of worshiping the serpent. And this was his conclusion when he in his book. It appears then that no nations were so geographically remote or so religiously discordant that one and only one superstitious characteristic was common to all, that the most civilized and the most barbarous bowed down with the same devotion to the same engrossing deity, and that this deity either was or was represented by the same sacred serpent. It appears also that in most, if not all, the civilized countries where this serpent was worshipped, some fable or tradition which involved his history, directly or indirectly, alluded to the fall of man in paradise, in which the serpent was concerned. What follows then, but that the most ancient account respecting the cause and nature of this seduction must be the one from which all the rest are derived, which represent the victorious serpent, victorious over man in a state of innocence and subduing his soul in a state of sin, as he would see it as a Christian, into the most abject veneration and adoration of himself. And this connection between, quote, the fall and reptilian manipulation is a very big constant if you look around the ancient world. And this brings me to this. Steve Taylor is an academic. He was at a university in Leeds. I don't know if he still is. And he wrote this book called The Fall. And what he was focusing on was a quite dramatic change in human perception and human behavior about 6,000 years ago, 4,000 BC. He points out in the book that there was no war, as we have come to know it, until 6,000 years ago. No patriarchy until 6,000 years ago. No massive inequality till 6,000 years ago. No class system as we know it. No gods and organized religion as we've come to know them. And that this dramatic change in human behavior perception followed violent invasions of Indo-European and Semitic peoples into the Middle East. And again, you know, everything's in inversion. People talk about Semitic peoples, oh, that must be Jewish peoples. No, Semitic relates to a language group in the Middle East, the overwhelming, massive majority of which are not Jewish, and anti-Semitic is a complete misnomer. They are Arabic languages. That's what Semitic overwhelmingly refers to. Now, this lady, Ryan Eisler, cultural historian in America, talking about this point 6,000 years ago, described it as the great change, a change so great indeed that nothing in all we know of human cultural evolution is comparable in magnitude. In 2015, this gentleman died in his 90s just a few months ago after a fall. In 2015, this man, William Mills Tompkins, wrote this book, Selected by Extraterrestrials, in which he describes how he was seconded into a top-secret American naval intelligence operation based at the massive naval base in San Diego. And this group he was seconded into in 1942 was to work and study and uncover the extraterrestrial presence and activities around the world, and to interact with some of those of different extraterrestrial races that were in some way benevolent to humans. And I'd written all about this reptilian thing and many other things long before he came out with this book. And he does produce pictures and documentation to show that he was with the people he says he was with, and he did have access to things he said he did. And what he said in this book, it obviously, you know, knocked me over with a feather. He said that every world government is controlled by what he calls the reptilians. And he said that in the book that the point where this reptilian manipulation really began, in other words, this archontic distortion operating through this reptilian form, was around 6,000 years ago. He also says in the book that the moon is a command center for this reptilian race and others, and that it's not at least totally natural, it's a construct. Something else I've been writing about for years. The world is just not like we think it is. We've been held in this narrow band of perception, and therefore we don't see what's really happening. And when people do reveal it, that perceptual prison says it's nonsense, it can't be. And that entity in the Charney Project, as I talk about in this book, Everything You Need to Know, and in previous books, and in those videos I mentioned earlier, also said the moon is an ET construct, and the moon is manipulating life on Earth with the frequencies it's giving out. So, this hijack, this great change, took us from a heart society to a gut brain society where we interact with emotion, not heart. And in the book, Steve Taylor, in this book, The Fall, he talks about how this new psyche, he calls it, where completely different perceptual way of behaving and looking at the world, came out of what he calls Saharasia. And it went off up into Europe and through the empires of Europe, not least the British. It went all over the world, this new psyche. And as, of course, it entered these different countries of the old psyche, of the original cultures, native cultures of those countries, it destroyed them, essentially. The new psyche destroyed the old psyche. Credo Mutwa told me when the British moved into South Africa, they wanted to milk the minds of the shaman, as he put it, and then kill them. They wanted an end to that knowledge stream. And this new psyche moved up into Europe, became the Roman Empire, became the British Empire and the European empires, and then went global through those empires. And still today, there are remnants of the old psyche, but a lot of the old psyche peoples have been absorbed into the new psyche. But there are some that can still process reality in a different way to the new psyche. And they see things the new psyche doesn't see. And we can change the new psyche by becoming conscious beyond mind. That changes the brain as well and the way it processes information. And one of these people was the source of information for a series of books from the 1960s to the 1990s by a man called Carlos Castaneda. And this source is, or was, a Central American shaman figure called Don Juan Matus. And when I was reading one of the books, I think it was the last one, it was extraordinary what he was describing, given what conclusions I'd come to up to that point from many other sources. This is what Don Juan Matus said about the manipulation of the world. We have a predator that came from the depth of the cosmos and took over the rule of our lives. Human beings are its prisoners. The predator is our Lord and Master. It has rendered us docile, helpless. If we want to protest, it suppresses our protest. If we want to act independently, it demands that we don't do so. Indeed, we are held prisoner. They took us over because we are food to them, energetic fear, low vibrational emotion. And they squeeze us mercilessly because we are their sustenance. Just as we rear chickens in coops, the predators rear us in human coops, human eros. Therefore, their food is always available to them. Think for a moment and tell me how you would explain the contradictions between the intelligence of man the engineer and the stupidity of his systems of belief, or the stupidity of his contradictory behavior. I'll explain that before this section's out. Sorcerers believe that the predators have given us our systems of beliefs, yes, our ideas of good and evil, our social mores. They are the ones who set up our dreams of success or failure. They have given us covetousness, greed, cowardice, the counterfeit spirit. It is the predator who makes us complacent, routinary, and egomaniacal. In order to keep us obedient and meek and weak, the predators engage themselves in a stupendous maneuver. Stupendous, of course, from the point of view of a fighting strategist, a horrendous maneuver from the point of those who suffer it. They gave us their mind. The predator's mind is baroque, contradictory, morose, filled with the fear of being discovered any minute now. They gave us their minds. That is what the Gnostics called the counterfeit spirit. He goes on, sorcerers of ancient Mexico reasoned that man must have been a complete being at one point, with stupendous insights, feats of awareness that are mythological legends nowadays. And then everything seems to disappear. And we now have a sedated man. What I'm saying is that what we have against us is not a simple predator. It is very smart and organized. It follows a methodical system to render us useless. Man, the magical being that he is destined to be when we expand awareness out of five senses again, is no longer magical. He's an average piece of meat. There are no more dreams for man, but the dreams of an animal who is being raised to be a piece of meat, trite, conventional, imbecilic. And that is where they have led the human race. And that contradiction that I'm going to explain when we get just a little further in. So how do we get there? We create our own bloodline network to operate within the target frequency reality, the simulation, in the level of the human scene. Because this non-human force doesn't want to put itself on public display, it is operating through a series of hybrid bloodlines which are doing its bidding within the world of the human scene, which to humans look human, but actually are not quite. This elite network of bloodlines is the full-blown counterfeit spirit. It's not the counterfeit spirit within humans that has to compete with consciousness and heart, and thus does not have the same impact on behavior that it would if it's full-blown counterfeit spirit with no balancing force at all. They are the bloodlines that run the world. They are the 1%, less than 1%, and the networks the 1% use to control human society. And if you look at the bloodlines and the people in positions of power, you look at the 1% and less than 1%, they have no empathy, no remorse, no shame, parasites, pathological liars, do whatever it takes to get what they want because they are full-blown expressions of this counterfeit spirit. The bloodlines that control human society today, and many others, of course. Now, the role of these bloodlines is like bloodline in-betweeners, I call them. Imagine that you have something that you can't work with directly because these entities that are this counterfeit spirit in form, they don't want to put themselves on public display. The counterfeit spirit itself cannot directly manipulate this reality because it's not of the same frequency band and can't interact with it. So it's got in-betweeners that represent it, and they can be vehicles for this distortion within human society while looking human. So you have something in a laboratory, say, and you can't work with it directly because they can't work with this reality directly. And so what you do is you stand outside and you put the gloves on and you work inside the sealed tank, and that way you can manipulate inside the tank without actually being in it. And if you take this dynamic, if you take the scientist outside the tank to be this archontic reptilian force, you take the gloves to be these bloodlines manipulating human society, and you take the tank to be our reality, this matrix, then that's the dynamic we're looking at. They are software programs. They are hybrid agent Smiths, simply vehicles for this archontic distortion to express itself in this world. That's why they act as they do. And this software program has to be protected. If you interbreed it with the wider human population, its traits, its character traits, including the lack of empathy, start getting diluted. This is where the elite interbreeding with each other comes from, whether it's the royals of old or the royals of today, or whether it's the interbreeding rich and famous families around the world. They're holding this particular software to stop it being diluted in its impact on behavior. So when we're looking at bloodline genealogy, in effect, on their level, it's replicating the software program, so it holds its power. And so we're looking at, therefore, a structure, a hierarchy, which comes out of the unseen through the reptilian and other non-human into the human dynasties, and then we enter the spider's web or the pyramid of manipulation within the society that we see. It's a whole hierarchy coming out of the unseen into the seen that I described much earlier. Now, these bloodlines are part human, so that we see them as human, and they're part non-human, and that non-human part connects into this reptilian force, this archontic force, whatever you want to call it. And because there's this hybrid nature, the frequency compatibility is much closer than the human population, and therefore the ability to use them as a vehicle and simply direct their behavior is much more powerful. This is a Swiss clairvoyant who can see further in to the energy field frequency that most humans can't. And I read this article, and I didn't know where it was going. It was just interesting. It was just an article about this guy's life. So I'm reading it, and then this came up. He said, when I see people in business or politics who are particularly trapped by the material world, for example, I notice they no longer have any light bodies at all. In many of these people, the point of light at the heart chakra, which is otherwise always present, is no longer visible to me. What do we call these people? Heartless. Exactly. Instead, I see something like a layer of shiny tar around them, in which a monstrous being in the shape of a lizard can be distinguished. When such people speak on television, for example, I see a crocodile shape manifesting itself around the person like in a concave mirror. I don't see the light of their throat and forehead chakra because they're not the same bodily construct as humans on an energetic level. They are dual DNA. And they believe they are the master race because they are genetically connected to what were perceived as the gods, the masters of human society. Just a trick of the light, don't worry. It's not real. Now, because this software vehicle for this archontic force and that force itself has no empathy, this is why they can do and create the horrific things that happen in the world and have no emotional consequence. We couldn't do that. The emotional impact would be crucifying, so we can't do it. To them, they have no problem. In fact, it's a good laugh. They are not like us. When people say they wouldn't do that, no, you wouldn't do that. They would do it and love it. That's the difference. And so when we look at these people, we see the human level, and they seem to be human and all that stuff. But on another part of their energetic hybrid field, they are not human. And how interesting, like I said earlier, that in this Avatar movie, which so described the descriptions of the golden age before all this hijack, that the American military going into the Blue People's Society on that planet Moon, they infiltrated them, the American military being symbolic of this archontic force, by taking on an outer blue people body. So the blue people became infiltrated into their society by people they thought were them. But they weren't. They were something else hiding behind what appeared to be them. That is exactly how our society has been hijacked. And this is a guy called Roddy Piper. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. But he was a wrestler, and he starred in a real cult movie. I saw it a long time ago, called They Live. And it was produced by a guy called John Carpenter, who, when you follow his film history, he is very much aware of what's going on. What he thinks of it, I don't know, but he's aware of it. And this was a story about how this guy, the character played by Roddy Piper, uncovered that the world was controlled by entities hiding behind human form. And part of it was he got some sunglasses, which were special sunglasses, and when you put the sunglasses on, you could see who they really were as opposed to what they appeared. When you took the glasses off, they were human. You put the glasses on, they weren't human. Anyway, he did an interview a few years ago and talked about my work and stuff like that in the interview in America. And he said, They Live, and he was serious. He said, They Live was not a movie. It was a documentary. It's what's really happening. And it is. And in these books, I go into the reptilian thing massively and at great length and have many stories of people's experiences of interacting with these entities and what have you. Now, one of the things, again, that I am laughed at about is when I say these bloodlines can shapeshift between human and reptilian form. You go, have a good laugh, there you go, you feel better now, that's good. Now, what people say, 5 sense reality, postage stamp consensus, you can't go from a physical body to another physical body. No. Do you know you can't? No, you can't. Of course you can't. That's ludicrous. But there's no physical. What we're looking at is when we talk about hybrid bloodlines, we're actually talking about hybrid energetic fields. One has the human information, one has the reptilian or other non-human information, not always reptilian. And therefore, when the human field is the dominant one, any observer is decoding that field. So when they decode that field into holographic reality, it looks like a human body. But when there is a shift and the other field becomes the dominant one, anyone who is observing that shift sees it holographically, they perceive it as physical, the movement of a human body to a non-human body, and often back again. The only place the shift takes place, quote, physically, is in the decoding systems of the brain at the back, where we decode information fields into visual holographic reality. It's not a physical shift. That would be impossible. So they are part human, part non-human, and it's the human part that's put forward most of the time. But I've talked to so many people who've experienced these people. Sometimes when they're in a real rage, it happens. A real rage. And when you're in a rage, you're sending an electrical charge through you. Sometimes you can get so angry you feel the electrical charge. And that charge can cause a shift they don't want to happen. And a number of times I've had described to me around the world where people in such a rage have suddenly shifted into a non-human form in the decoding systems of the observer. So the more that the information of one field is dominant, the more you will decode that shift. And that's the same with possession. You know these exorcist-type possessions, where people's faces actually change? I've seen it. It's bizarre. It's because the possessing entity's information field becomes more and more the dominant information source, and as it imposes itself upon the possessed energetic field, it's impacting more and more on the field that the observer is decoding. And as that happens, the observer is seeing the face shift from one form to another. What's happening is one dominant information field is becoming the dominant one over another. And that's what exorcist-type satanic possession is about. So the only place that shifting takes place physically is in the decoding systems of the brain. And so we're looking at these people, and they appear to be human, but they're very different beyond what we can see. Now, the journey of these bloodlines is the same as the journey of the new psyche. Stands back in amazement. These are the controlling bloodlines of the new psyche. They move the same way. These bloodlines became the people that established the Roman Empire and these other empires, the British Empire and the empires of Europe. And eventually, they created global Babylon as the new psyche went all over the world, as I've described. And that's when this global structure I described earlier was moved into place. And what we're looking at really is the virus spreading. That's what it is, the distortion spreading through all these different changes in society that they've been imposing. Now, Satanism, secret societies, and religion all ultimately are controlled by that force. The vast majority of people in religion don't know that. A lot more people in Satanism will know that, and the inner sanctums of secret societies will know that. Most of the rest will not. And Satanism is a vehicle, a structure, a ritual structure for worshipping this distortion, this archontic force, of which, of course, the reptilians and greys are fundamentally involved. This is why you've got Satan called the deceiver, and the archontic force called the great deceiver, the demon of demons, the archon of archons. They transfer between each other. They're talking about the same thing. And I've talked to many people that have taken part in satanic rituals. some that have conducted rituals under my control, some that have seen, quote, the light. And they've described to me many times how these entities outside of human sight, in other realities, are doing rituals at the same time that the satanic rituals are taking place in this reality, and they are working to create an energetic doorway or channel between the ritual in the unseen and the ritual in our world. And many times I've had described to me how these entities have manifested in these really powerful satanic rituals in our world. They can't stop for long because of the energy it takes, but they can manifest in them, and that's described to me many times. Now, when we have human sacrifice, and what has been called in the past sacrifices to the gods, that is exactly what they were. But what were the gods? The gods were these entities that feed off human fear and feed off human terror and feed off human low vibrational emotion. And when they're putting the sacrifice through the terror of the ritual, that terror is being absorbed by these entities in other levels of reality, and the gods are getting the gift of that energy. That's what it is. And again, in the ancient world, what do they talk about? Sacrificing young virgins to the gods. That's just code for children. And they're still doing it. Places like Halloween, times like Halloween, phenomenal amounts of children are being sacrificed to the gods all over the world. When I started researching how many children go missing in this world every year, just in America alone, people think that if it's in the paper, then that's someone's looking for a missing child. That relates to how many children go missing. Oh, no. Astonishing numbers of children go missing all over the world. Credo Mutwa tells me of all the children that go missing, never to be found again in Africa. Because they want that energy of children before puberty, because it's a certain essence that they want to absorb. And that's why they want sacrifice of children. That's why they want pedophilia and abuse, sexually abuse of children. While the pedophile is having sex with a child, he is a vehicle through which the possessing entity can draw off the child's energy. The ancient shamans talk about this, as well as people now today. Now, in terms of Satanism, these satanic bloodlines run in, well, you might call them satanic bloodlines. They run through history, and you can follow them. And this is one of the most famous Satanists ever, Vlad the Impaler, in what is now Romania. And in the 15th century, he became infamous for, and was called Vlad the Impaler, for impaling vast numbers of people on spikes and watching them slowly die while drinking their blood while he did it. I mean, he was a nice man. Now, Vlad the Impaler was the character on which Bram Stoker based Dracula. Because these bloodlines literally do drink blood. That's what they do in the satanic rituals. British royal family all take part in these rituals. I've had it described to me so many times over the years. And Vlad the Impaler was a member of something called the Royal Order of the Dragon, or the Royal Court of the Dragon, which has a longer name, goes back to ancient Egypt. And it is one of the inner sanctum secret societies of the reptilian human bloodlines. Here is one of Vlad the Impaler's relatives. The royal family of Britain is the same bloodline as Vlad the Impaler. And the connection is through someone called Mary of Teck, the present Queen's grandmother. Prince Charles has openly talked about his ancestor, Vlad the Impaler, and has bought a lot of property in Romania around where Vlad was a lad, shall we say. And the royal family, therefore, of Britain, that I say take part in satanic rituals and are reptilian human hybrid bloodlines, are descendants of Dracula. It kind of makes sense. Here's another family that descend from Vlad the Impaler. It's a network which goes through history interbreeding with itself. And you see the satanic imagery now coming more and more into public view through videos, pop videos, stage shows, etc. This is the end of Michael Jackson's Thriller, which was about Satanism, of course, and he turns around and there's the serpent eyes. We have Halloween becoming more and more prominent, bringing children into that vibe. At a time when children are literally sacrificed in vast numbers at Halloween, same with May Day on the other side of the year, we have now children pulled into trick or treat and all these things, all of which go back to Celtic rituals of sacrifice. And also, this Satanism and the secret societies, they, of course, are peopled by those that run politics, banking, and media, and these other institutions. Therefore, they control it from the point of view and perception of a Satanist. That's why they'll destroy people with banking crashes, and they'll foreclose on their houses, throw them in the street. No empathy. There's no emotional consequence for that because of who they are. And once you understand their psyche, you understand what they do and why they do it. They are psychopaths. They are bred to be psychopaths. This is a Swiss banker talking to a Russian magazine in 2011 about these satanic bankers in Switzerland. He said these people are corrupt, sick in their minds, so sick that they're full of vices, and those vices are kept under wraps on their orders. Many are into Satanism. When you go in some banks, you see these satanistic symbols, like in the Rothschild Bank in Zurich. These people are controlled by blackmail because of the weaknesses they have. They have to follow orders or they will be exposed, they will be destroyed or even killed. See, when you can sacrifice a child, what the hell is throwing someone out their house? Taking their land. And then you come to religion. A lot of people express their spirituality through religion, good luck to them. But at the inner sanctum level, they are all expressions of this force, ultimately. Because it wants people to have a belief system that is rigid and unmoving, because then they got you in the program. And you look at the symbol of Christianity, it's a frickin' human sacrifice. That's what it is. And you look at things like the Eucharist, it's Satanism light. Instead of literally eating the body and drinking the blood, they eat the biscuit, he's got a biscuit there, and drink the wine. It's just Satanism light in a way that's acceptable in the public arena. And, you know, if you're going to worship a biscuit, do it properly. That's what I say. Get some sponsorship. Get some sponsorship. Don't mess about. Do it right. And what is religion? It is a tiny band of possibility which people will not step out of because it's breaking the bounds of the religion. It's a program. And look, where did religion come from? The major religions. They came out of the same place the new psyche came from in the period after the new psyche, the birthplace of religion. They came out of the Middle East and Near East, where the new psyche came out of and went around the world. And when I talk there about randomness, pseudo-randomness, religion is pseudo-randomness. It's the same program hidden behind different names, labels, and rituals. Okay, what are you? Oh, I'm a Muslim. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, what it means is that I go to the mosque, and this man in a gown tells me what God wants and what I have to do to please God. Okay, gotcha. You? Oh, I'm Jewish. What does that mean? Well, I go to the synagogue, and this man in a gown tells me what God wants and what I have to do to please God. You? Christian. Okay, what do you do? I go to church. And this man, often in a gown, tells me what God wants me to do to please God and go to heaven. It's a program. It's the same program. They just give them different names, and it's all the same. Oh, you blasphemer! You're breaking the religion. You're breaking the program. Oh, good. They're all pissing in the same pot. At the core, There's a lot of people, not in Satanism, but in religion, who are genuine people and nice people expressing themselves through the religion. I'm talking about the controlling force. And so you look at all these different parts of human society that are pushing us in this direction to the Hunger Games society I've been describing, and ultimately they're controlled by that, because that's the spider I talked about earlier. And a lot more I could say there, but I want to really concentrate on this in this last hour, because this is so frickin' important. Up to this point, control of human perception has been by controlling information that people receive through all these education systems and media and all that stuff, and holding people in the postage stamp consensus through their life. That's not where they wanted to stop it, or ever where it was supposed to end. This is a process of deeper and deeper control of human perception. What they want to do now, and it's happening in front of our eyes, they want to go from manipulating human perception to being human perception. This is the next stage. They want to create another expansion of the archontic hive mind, and they want that to be the absorption of the human mind. And this is, if we go back to that Charney project and that entity that allegedly communicated through that computer interface, and it's supposed to have said humans are more involved spiritually than the reptiles, but they suppress humans with their technology. Their God is their technology. And that is what this is all about, transhumanism. The plan happening to put technology inside human brain, to connect with artificial intelligence, so artificial intelligence starts to be the human mind. That's not a conspiracy theory. They're telling us that for reasons I'll come to. In Phantom Self, I have a chapter at the end, or towards the end, called Transphantomism. And that term I invented is describing this process, going beyond the phantom. Up to this point, creating a phantom self, a five-sense self, believing it's all that's what it is, has been the way that the human psyche has been held in servitude. Now they want to go beyond the phantom, transphantom, into transhumanism, beyond the phantom. They want to complete the job of entrapping human awareness, which is where this has been leading all along from the point that this hijack first happened. They want to completely disconnect five-sense mind from expanded consciousness. And this is one of the key people. He's a Google executive. Google is a monster. And he's the PR man for Frankenstein. He is selling this absorption, this assimilation of the human mind into artificial intelligence as a great thing and the next stage of human evolution. Unless he's completely brainless, he sure as hell knows that's not why it's happening. Google, I mentioned earlier about the devil's playground, Silicon Valley, and how it's hijacking more and more control of the information that we receive or don't receive. It's also one of the prime drivers of this transhumanism. Google is big time into it. Facebook is big time into it. Another monster. And this is about manipulating humans to allow artificial intelligence to take them over. Now, what is driving Silicon Valley is this, DARPA. This is the technological development arm of the Pentagon. It creates lovely things and contributions to human society like death rays, because they haven't got enough ways to kill people yet. There's a DARPA spokesman. They're completely bonkers, but unfortunately they have the strings of power. And DARPA, Google, Facebook, they're all expressions of the same web, and DARPA is driving this transhumanism through people like Google and Facebook, and they're all working as one unit. Now, here's an example of that. This is a lady called Regina Duggan. She started out as a director of DARPA. She then made an extraordinary career move and left DARPA and became an executive of Google. She then left Google and became an executive of Facebook in charge of creating things like brain-computer interfaces. Facebook is not just a social media organization. That's just the front to manipulate people's perceptions via that way. It's much bigger than that. Google is horrific, pure, undiluted evil. In fact, the whole network is, certainly DARPA, one of the most evil organizations on earth. And her job at Facebook has been to develop technologies that fluidly blend physical and digital worlds. What I was talking about earlier. And one of the things that she comes up with, Facebook shares brain control ambitions. What a surprise, what a coincidence that she was a director of DARPA. All these organizations, Google owned YouTube, Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, all of them, are all web organizations working as one unit, ultimately deep in the shadows, to stitch up humanity. And it's become more and more obvious. Facebook conducted widespread experiments on user data to alter people's behavior. They're manipulating perception now daily through this. Tech giants' artificial intelligence monopoly, possibly the most dangerous in history. Some people are starting to see it. Do you believe that Google, Facebook, IBM, all building machines to outthink the human mind is all a coincidence without an ultimate goal? No chance. So, how do we get there? We turn them into robots connected to a hive mind which we control. That is what transhumanism is all about. That's what this technological revolution is all about, and I will provide the detail. The reptilians' greys have been absorbed into this hive mind, this distortion, this archontic distortion. Now they want to assimilate humanity into the same distortion via artificial intelligence. What did the Gnostics say in their language that the Archons were? Artificial intelligence. Humanity and AI, the assimilation. Oh, it's going to be so great. No, it's not. Sci-fi, both in movies and in television and in books, has so often put the plan in front of us. And this is a race that was part of the Star Trek series in their multiple forms called the Borg. The Borg are the Archons or the transhumans. The Borg, Archon, transhumans. That's what they were. They were part technology, part what we would call biological. And they used to fly around in black cubes. Black cubes is an ancient symbol for Saturn, and as I go into detail in everything you need to know, is very much part of this old thing, and that's why there's so much Saturn symbolism all around us. There's one of the Borg cubes in Star Trek going past Saturn, how appropriate. So this is what the Borg were described as. The Borg are a collection of species that have been turned into cybernetic organisms functioning as drones in a hive mind called the collective or the hive. The Borg use a process called assimilation to force other species into the collective by injection of microscopic machines called nanoprobes, and the mantra of the Borg is resistance is futile. This is Peter H. Diamandis, co-founder of the Singularity Transhumanism University with Ray Kurzweil. He said, anybody who is going to be resisting the progress forward to transhumanism is going to be resisting evolution, and fundamentally they will die out. It is not a matter of whether it's good or bad, it's going to happen. Resistance is futile, in other words. It isn't, by the way. Now, these nanobots that the Borg talked about, which assimilated their targets into the hive mind, the collective, now exist We call them nanotechnology, nanobots, nanoids, nanites, nanomachines, nanomites. Micro machines that can assemble and maintain sophisticated systems and can build devices, machines, or circuits through a process called molecular manufacturing. They can also produce copies of themselves through self-replication. These now exist. And they're also known as smart dust or neural dust, digital dust. And they're described as tiny electronic particles for wireless communication with each other and anything they connect with. And what they're already doing, this is a story about it, is they're putting this neural dust into the brains of victims in experiments, and from that they are very painfully manipulating those people from afar via the neural dust. This is where they want to go. Now, you know, we talk about cameras in the street and surveillance. Well, this is from the promotional material of this smart dust, nano dust material. Smart dust, infusing all matter, which is what they want to do, have it everywhere, can recognize an individual anywhere they are to the extent that their computer can be automatically turned on when they walk through the door at work, and the elevator can automatically open at the right floor. Forget cameras in the streets once this stuff starts moving around. Now, this is what Kurzweil said from the Google monster. Nanobots will infuse all the matter around us with information. Rocks, trees, everything will become these intelligent creatures. I'll come back to that in a second. He said, with robots in our brains, we'll be godlike. No, we'll be robots, and this guy frickin' knows it. We'll be superhuman. That's what they're telling us as. We need, this is why they're openly doing it. It's going to make us superhuman. Hey, man, come on, get connected. Well, the same people that want to make us superhuman have all this period of human existence been suppressing the superhuman powers that humans naturally have by holding us in this perceptual prison. Declassified document suggests that many of us have superhuman powers. Yes, the ones they've been suppressing all these years and want to complete the process of suppressing through connection to technology and artificial intelligence. Kurzweil, we're not talking a long time now. Kurzweil says humans will have hybrid cloud-powered brains by 2030. And he says our thinking will be a hybrid of biological and non-biological thinking. Humans will be able to extend their limitations and think in the cloud. We're going to put gateways to the cloud in our brains. We're going to gradually merge and enhance ourselves. In my view, that's the nature of being human. We transcend our limitations. This is the sales pitch, and it's absolute bollocks. He goes on. As the technology becomes vastly superior to what we are, then the small proportion that is still human gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it's just utterly negligible, by which time there will be no human mind, just a biological, not even that in the end, terminal for artificial intelligence. That is what transhumanism is all about. New computers could delete thoughts without your knowledge, experts warn. The plan is that once this starts to happen, the human memory is deleted. So we start at year zero. This technology exists now. And Silicon Valley, the devil's playground, is the way it's being brought out of the shadows into human society. A DARPA insider was talking. You could see the presentation on YouTube. He was trying to kind of, as best he can, put a good face on it, but he was revealing the current hive mind control grid that is being built all around us. The idea is to connect the human brain to the cloud, and so the cloud becomes the human brain. No more human thinking. And this is what it's really about. It's about symbolically closing off the connection between five-sense mind awareness and expanded awareness, so never the twain shall meet, and create a permanent prison of five-sense mind. And one thing I would say is all these people now, and some of them will be genuine, are coming out and saying, yeah, we do live in a simulation. Yeah, I say we do. But why are they suddenly all coming out and starting to say it after all these years? Beware of the double bluff. If they start saying, well, okay, we're in a simulation, we've got to make the best of it, and so let's connect through technology, then it's a con, because they're not telling you the one thing. We may be in a simulation, but we are not the simulation. We may be in a vehicle connected to the simulation, but we are not the vehicle. We are the I, the consciousness, the awareness experiencing through it. And that's what they want us not to know. And we have this guy here, Elon Musk, who is coming out quite often now, warning about how dangerous AI is and how it could take out humanity. But he's also buying companies like Neuralink to merge the human brain with AI. He's also putting satellites into orbit to beam Wi-Fi at the Earth, all over the Earth, which is fundamentally part of what I'm talking about. I'll come to that in a second. So your actions do not match your words. And until I see differently, and I haven't yet, I will see him as the transhumanist good cop to Kurzweil's bad cop. Elon Musk wants to merge brains with computers with Matrix-style technology, but says how dangerous it's going to be. I don't follow. Now, this cloud, this sub-reality, like I've just mentioned, to have everyone connected to it worldwide, the cloud has to be everywhere. And this cloud is designed to be Wi-Fi, to have a Wi-Fi field all over the earth where no one can escape from it, and the connection to the cloud of the human brain will be through this Wi-Fi field, what I've been calling for years, the technological sub-reality. So, if they're going to do that, they need Wi-Fi everywhere. And that's exactly what they are doing. Satellites are going up at an extraordinary rate to beam Wi-Fi back at every area of the earth, and this is why they are doing it. Elon Musk is big time involved, and I read a financial report on what he and others are doing, putting up really expensive satellites to beam Wi-Fi at sub-Saharan Africa and places where no one frickin' lives, basically. And the financial report was saying, well, we just can't see any way he'll ever get his money back. But that's not the idea. It's not about money. It's about creating a Wi-Fi cloud that no one on Earth can escape. Google to Wi-Fi entire Earth with 180 satellites. Introducing the outer net, free worldwide Wi-Fi access beamed from space. You remember there was a satellite exploded at Cape Canaveral last year. It was a SpaceX Elon Musk satellite, rocket, and it was about to take up a Facebook Wi-Fi satellite to beam sub-Saharan Africa with Wi-Fi. Because, of course, the T-shirt, Zuckerberg, hey, man, hey, I'm with you guys. He has this burning desire for people in sub-Saharan Africa to watch CNN and go on bloody Google search engines and Facebook. Extraordinary. Never going to get his money back, but that's not what it's about. And to give you an idea of how fast this is an Indian satellite breaking the record, or an Indian rocket breaking the record of taking 104 satellites up into space in one launch. So the idea is to create a sub-reality, technological sub-reality, and connect the human brain to it, so the artificial intelligence running the sub-reality controls the minds of every human attached to it. That means every human. That's the plan. Google, NASA, putting big money on D-Wave's quantum computer. What this sub-reality is a mini technological version of the reality, what I call the quantum computer universe, that we're actually experiencing. That's why they are going to run this with a quantum computer system. The quantum internet is just a decade away. Same principle. And another name for the cloud and the technological sub-reality is the smart grid. Everything these days has got smart in front of it, and everything smart technologically is designed to connect and communicate with every other thing that is called smart technologically. We have smart grids unfolding with smart television, smart phones, smart watches, smart meters, smart dust, smart pills, smart streets, smart cities, smart communities, all smart frickin' everything. And they are defined, a smart object is defined as something that interacts with not only people, but also other smart objects. That's how the grid is built. We have smartphones, we have smart televisions watching us, listening to us. We have smart meters, which is connected to this Wi-Fi grid. This is why they want smart meters in every home and business, because it throws up an electromagnetic Wi-Fi field, which is part of this technological sub-reality. That's why they want it. The fact that it's devastating for health to be in that environment day after day is irrelevant to these people. They give a shit. Got no empathy. And of course they are in part justifying smart meters because we've got to save the world. Everything interconnects. The sub-realities, sub-reality smart cities, as they're calling them, they are the human settlement zones, where these smart cities are controlled by artificial intelligence. This is one that's a mock-up in New Mexico in America. CIA Signature School is creating total surveillance smart cities. These are the human settlement zones. Saudi Arabia's announced it's going to build a $500 billion high-tech mega city, one of these smart cities, 33 times bigger than New York. And it's all a global control grid where everything connects to everything else, which then connects to the human mind. And this is one of the keys to the grid, the introduction of 5G cellular technology to blanket planetary life with ultra-high microwave frequencies. This is the level of power they need, at very least, to run this grid as they want it. And that's why they're rushing out this health-destroying, perception-destroying 5G as fast as they can without any regulation. And if you look at these 5G transmitters here, because of the nature of the way it works, you need transmitters very, very close to each other. You're talking fantastic numbers of these transmitters in streets and communities pouring out this 5G microwave health-destroying shite. And it's working on the same frequencies that they use for crowd control weapons, which operate by burning the skin and making people run to get away from it. Oh, honey, what's on the telly? Is there a game show on tonight? Oh, is there some football on? What's going on? While all this is unfolding, bang, day after day after day. Another part of this is changing the atmosphere, changing the sources of information. They want a massively irradiated atmosphere because that suits this archontic force and what it's doing and the agenda. Because this archontic distortion feeds off radiation. It is radiation. This whole reality is built on radiation. And this matrix, symbolized by this torch beam, this frequency, it's all built on radiation. It is radiation. This is a mainstream scientific study that concluded aliens could survive on a diet of radiation, study finds. Well, if you can feed off radiation, then you can. And so the electromagnetic sea in which we all live and interact with is now being irradiated like never before as part of this whole agenda. This is why these transmitters of all this devastating radiation, both not for health alone, but for also perception and the way the brain works, is being poured out all over the world. We've got school children every day spending their entire time sitting in Wi-Fi fields at school. And they're hiding them away in things like this. So they appear to be one thing, but actually they're transmitters while looking to be something natural like that. And this is a former DARPA scientist, very naively thinking he's going to warn people. They bloody know it's doing it, man. Cell towers across the USA are broadcasting brain resonance frequencies to disrupt human minds, says former DARPA scientist. And of course, when he warned about it, no one listened at DARPA because they thought, well, that's why we're doing it, mate. And so we have children being brought up in this incredible irradiated environment. And we had a report in Britain a few months ago which said there'd been a massive increase in brain tumors, especially among the young, but they didn't know why. Oh, I think I can give them a clue somehow. Madness. Why don't they say the obvious? Because the agenda doesn't want that to be made obvious. All we're having is tomorrow's generation, as well as the adults of today, bombarded with this perceptual manipulation, health-destroying shite called radiation. And of course, the Rothschilds, I've shown this, I know this from a massive insider, the Rothschilds were behind the introduction of nuclear power, every one of which is a potential nuclear bomb. Now, this guy, Michael Pessinger, is a neuroscientist at Laurentian University in Canada. And he's done years and years of research into the effect of this massively irradiated atmosphere that we're living in. And he says this: for the first time in our evolutionary history, we have generated an entire secondary, virtual, densely complex environment, an electromagnetic soup, that essentially overlaps the human nervous system. And they've developed it because that's exactly what it's supposed to do, to envelop the human nervous system and take over all perceptual processes of the body. Welcome to the real world, the one that we are heading into so fast unless we wake up in numbers. Artificial intelligence is summoning the frickin' demon. And of course, in the Matrix movies, which were so symbolic, machine cities, they were basically smart cities and the smart grid, and they were controlled by artificial intelligence. The Demiurge Archons, this distortion, is described in our language by the Gnostics as a form of artificial intelligence, inorganic. And what we have been manipulated to do is to build a technological vehicle for this archontic distortion to take over human society and to absorb into itself the human mind. We talk at the moment, I mean, you know, people talk about AI this, AI that, AI is going to do this, AI does this, AI frickin' everywhere. I don't hear the question, what is AI? And when I read AI scientists commenting on, we don't really understand it. It seems to be learning faster than we thought. You don't understand it? Well, what are you doing then? AI could be described as algorithmic intelligence. And on one level, that's what we're seeing, algorithms used to manipulate and use technology and what have you. But what I say is, eventually, what's meant to run this technological sub-reality is not algorithmic intelligence, though that could still be part of it, but archontic intelligence, the direct vehicle for this intelligence to take over the world. What we've been doing is building a technological vehicle for this virus to take over everything. And this answers Don Juan Matus's question, as I'll come to in a second. So when that question was asked in that science series, Through the Wormhole, are digital aliens hiding within technological systems? Well, this is the kind of thing they were talking about. And this is Don Juan Matus's question. Think for a moment and tell me how you would explain the contradictions between the intelligence of man the engineer and the stupidity of his systems of belief, or the stupidity of his contradictory behavior. What's been happening is humanity has been manipulated on a road to develop the side of the brain and the nature of intelligence, intellect, to the point where the ability is there to build that prison, while having the other part of the psyche, expanded psyche, and what we would call wisdom, insight, and seeing the big picture, suppressed. So people build their own technological prison without having the insight to see that is what they are doing. That is what has happened, and that's why you have this contradiction that has been highlighted by Don Juan Matus of the brilliance of man the engineer build the prison, but the stupidity of his systems of belief don't see that's what you're doing. This is what's been happening. The whole system's been set up to do this, manipulated and evolved to build our own prison without realizing that's what we've done. Bye-bye humans. I don't agree with the monkey, but the end is spot on unless we wake up to this. And now perhaps we can start to see the real reason that ultra-Zionist hate groups are trying to shut down what I am saying. It's nothing about, he's saying this about Zionism, that's just the excuse to silence me. It's to stop this getting out because of what those groups represent in the big picture and in the web. Remember when the world was run by humans? We are being taken over by this AI now. Artificial intelligence could mean the end of humankind. Stephen Hawking, yes, mate, but that's the frickin' idea. That's the bit they miss. It's not an accident. It's happening by long-term planning. The Archon mind, transhumans, the assimilation. And the basis of this technological sub-reality is the internet. The internet is designed to become the technological collective mind controlled by AI, which will control everything connected to the internet, which is planned to be everything, including the human brain. In 1969, Dr. Richard Day described the World Wide Web that was supposed to have been invented in 1989, because this has been planned all along. You know, we are operating in a certain band of frequency. Let's call it a timeline, which has developed in a certain way in terms of its understanding of reality and all not understanding reality. That which is manipulating this society is not operating in that timeline. Our point of technological awareness is not the point of technological awareness of those that are manipulating us. They're in another reality, much more advanced with technology, which is what they were describing with the reptilians' technology as their god. When humans in this timeline were knocking rocks together, this technology that's now being introduced already existed in other timelines and other realities. And what's been happening is cover stories have been introduced. Oh, it came from a geek in a garage. Oh, okay. And where it's really coming from is out of the deep underground bases, what are known as DUMBs, around the world, not least in America, where there's an interface, if you go deep enough, where the real security clearance is necessary, between these reptilian and other entities and human scientists, and that's where the interface takes place, which then comes out as these technologies. I mean, given that the control of humanity is dependent on the development of greater and greater forms of technology, are we really naive enough to think that these manipulators are sitting around a table just frickin' waiting? Oh yeah, we can't go any further, we haven't got the technology. No, the technology just appears like magic. I watched a BBC documentary series, two programs it was, about Silicon Valley. And they had this sequence of garage doors in Silicon Valley and California. And in this sequence of garage doors, they were saying this technology, which changed this and developed, changed the whole thing, was developed behind that garage door by a geek, and this is the garage door. Behind there was developed that. Always another garage door. Behind there was developed that. I think they were sitting around a table after that series and going, hold on a minute. We've got to change the frickin' narrative. You know this? You know these cover stories to get this stuff in the public arena, mate? Too many garage doors. They're going to see it. They're going to see it. Another narrative, please. Because this is what's happening. It's coming out. It already exists. This is why it's now moving so fast. They don't have to develop the technology. They just have to introduce it. The world is so different. And DARPA, you're talking about the internet as an entity, DARPA openly says, we created it. It was created with military technology. What, do they want people to communicate and have free discourse worldwide? Is that what DARPA wants? Of course not. The opposite. It's just a vehicle. And what they're doing now, because they had to sell the internet, and you couldn't sell the internet if they were selling the internet that it's becoming, they had to sell the internet, get people hooked on it by the free flow of information. Oh, this is great, we can communicate, no censorship, this is great. But the internet, of course, is the most perfect vehicle for surveillance, control, and perceptual manipulation. And now what they're doing, this is what we're seeing, with all the censorship and the other things, is they're now everyone's hooked on it. They're deleting what is bad for them, the free flow of information, and leaving what is good for them, a fantastic vehicle for perceptual manipulation and for surveillance. And during the brief tenure of a guy called David Petraeus at the CIA, he announced the development, which we're now seeing unfold so fast, of what he called the Internet of Things, where you connect everything to the internet, be it domestic appliances, the fridge, the car, not least with driverless cars, which is all part of this, and Elon Musk's involved in that. Everything connects to the internet. Google's Nest now talks to washing machines, lights, and even your car. Firm launches a program that connects any smart gadget to its thermostat. Oh, he's opened the door, he's going for the cheese. And, oh, that's a joke, that's great. No, it's not a freaking joke. Invasive Amazon.com now wants to monitor your refrigerator and track everything you eat via connection to the internet. Same with these driverless cars. AI implants will allow us to control our homes with our thoughts within 20 years. No, our homes will be allowed to control our thoughts. That's the way it's meant to go. And it's so appropriate that it's called the World Wide Web. Now, also designed to be connected to the Internet of Things, which then is called the name Internet of Everything, is the human mind, which means that whatever controls the internet controls everything, including the human mind. This is what's happening. Now, a few years ago, there was a movie called Transcendence, starring Johnny Depp, that put all this in front of your face as a movie. Some scientists are asking, could the internet wake up and become conscious? I say it already is, to an extent at least. Transcendence was a movie that was based just a little into the future, not far. And the Internet of Things was reality. And quantum computers were a reality. And the Johnny Depp figure was a scientist who found he was dying. So his wife, who's also a scientist, they downloaded his consciousness, his mind, onto a quantum computer. And when he died, she downloaded his mind onto the internet, and Johnny Depp's mind took over the internet. This was symbolic of AI. Transcendence, the internet wakes up and becomes conscious. And the idea is that everything is connected to the internet, including the human mind, and artificial intelligence, I say archontic intelligence, then takes control of the internet and controls everything connected to the internet, including the human mind. Now, in Transcendence, how they connected humans to the internet and the Johnny Depp's mind control of the internet, thus control of their minds, was by releasing sentient nanoparticles spread on the wind. Now, those sentient nanoparticles I've just described, smart dust, nanobots, whatever, have you? And this is how they are being spread on the wind. There are many things in chemtrails, not contrails, chemtrails coming out of aircraft which crisscross the sky, and instead of dissolving like contrails, condensation trails, do not dissolve, but just pan out. I've sat in America, in a desert of America, for a week at a town there, and I've watched aircraft crisscross a crystal blue sky in the morning and turn it into a cloudy sky by early afternoon through chemtrails. And in these are aluminium and other metals that are really bad for health and create a conductive atmosphere, which is great for weather control and many other things. But in there is nanotechnology. And that is how they are infusing the world with nanobots and smart dust, as I've described. If we go back to Kurzweil, nanobots will infuse all the matter around us with information. Rocks, trees, everything will become these intelligent creatures. How the hell are you going to do that globally unless you drop it from the sky? And that's what chemtrails are all about. And since chemtrails started, well, they started earlier, but people became aware of them in the late 1990s. In the same period has come the chemtrail disease, known as Morgellons or Morgellons disease, where people are finding fibers, self-replicating fibers in their body, hollow tubes, and many other things. I'll show a few examples that are coming out of their skin that are growing, and you pull them out and they self-replicate themselves. And what they're saying to hide this is that the people suffering from Morgellons disease are suffering from a psychosis. It's in their mind. Yes, that's a manifestation of the mind and not something that's inside the body. That's absolutely right, you fricking idiots. But the reason they're saying that is they don't want the truth to come out, because then the dominoes start to fall. Well, what's going on? Where is it coming from? These are some of the things that are coming out. I know someone in America who's got Morgellons, and she sent me a load of pictures that she's collected of it. Here's some of them. Bits of silicon coming out of their bodies, often in a kind of hexagonal kind of shape. These have all come out of the bodies of Morgellons sufferers who are just dismissed by the medical profession. That's come out of the bodies. This is all technology that has grown from nanotechnology. And there is a theory, that's all it is at the moment, that Morgellons sufferers are those whose bodies have rejecting the nanotechnology, and that's why it's showing, whereas other people are absorbing it. Well, this has all come out of the bodies. Now, this is a biodegradable polymer. Scientists have made star-shaped biodegradable polymers that can self-assemble into hollow nanofiber spheres. And when the spheres are injected with cells into wounds, these spheres biodegrade, but cells live to form new tissue. Well, look, that is a technological creation. And that is something that's coming out of the bodies of Morgellons sufferers. That's coming out of a Morgellons sufferer. And that has come out of one Morgellons sufferer, and it's basically straight out the frickin' Matrix. And some of them light up, and their power source is something called piezoelectricity or pressing electricity, where the body movement creates electricity through the body movement, and these things are empowered by them. This is a doctor in America. Mysterious new blood bacteria seems like nanobot bioweapon. This is what we're looking at. We're being frickin' invaded. We're being invaded while thinking we're living in a free world, a real world. It's not how it is, and this is a key area of where this is meant to go. What they're looking at is the creation of a synthetic human form to replace the biological human form that we know as part of this transformation and assimilation. Synthetic is defined as of a substance made by chemical synthesis, especially to imitate a natural product. And imitate, counter-mimicry, and the distortion, the act of twisting or altering something out of its true, natural, original state. That's synthetic. And the archontic force is basically, you could call it synthetic. It's assimilating us into it. The Archon world is a synthetic world. And if you put these words into YouTube, Sophia Smallstorm, she's a friend of mine, The Dark Agenda of Synthetic Biology, there's a long and detailed presentation about just this one area. It's worth watching. Now, what they're doing is creating synthetic everything on the road to this. Synthetic cells, synthetic blood, synthetic skin, synthetic everything. A step closer to designer babies, human cells could be made from scratch in 10 years as scientists reveal plans to create an entire synthetic genome. This is where we're going, and this is why we're going there. Synthetic genetics is basically copying the computer codes of the biological form and turning it into a synthetic version. Will designer babies end the need for sex? Humans could reproduce using skin samples within 20 years, claims geneticist. And what they're talking about are stem cells, which are cells simply waiting for instructions to become any cell you want, including sperm. Thus, they can procreate without sexual procreation. And this is where it's going. The synthetic human is designed to have no sexes, no gender, and have no means of procreation, but will be created in laboratory situations without procreation. And that is what this is all about. I have a phrase I've used so many times over the years. When something comes out of nowhere and is suddenly everywhere, it's the agenda. Every time someone's pressed a button on the next stage. Now, whether people feel that they're in the wrong body is none of my business, and they should get all the support they need to come to terms with whatever they decide they want to do. Of course that's right. I mean, why would anyone want to discriminate against someone in that situation? Of course not. But what they do, same with me. They talk about, oh, he's racist, he's against these, the Zionists. No, that's the excuse, mate, to stop this stuff coming out, right? And so the excuse for transgenderism is we must stop discrimination against transgender people. But that's not what it's about. That's the frickin' excuse. They don't give a shit about transgender people. They don't give a shit about anybody. Got no empathy, nothing. The reason for the explosion of transgender is not to stop discrimination against transgender people. It's to confuse people, especially the young, about their gender who weren't confused before. That's what it's about. It's about making people confused that weren't confused before because of this agenda that I'm coming to. And this is why it's everywhere. This is why the language is being changed. You can't say mother and father anymore. You can't say boys and girls and all this crap. And I would say to people in this transgender arena, and it's often not transgender people who are pushing this crap. It's other people that are pushing it and using them as the excuse. It's a very different thing. My dot is not the only dot. And we need to look with peripheral vision at what's happening and why it's happening. Why is there explosion everywhere? Why do I tick transgender explosion off in every country I go into? Because it's a global agenda. And this is Richard Day, Dr. Richard Day in 1969. What did he tell those doctors? Boys and girls are going to be made the same. This is what is happening. Children as young as 13 to be asked whether they are gender fluid, demigirl, or intersex. 25 different genders to choose from. Oh yeah, let's confuse them. Oh, people are becoming more gender fluid just because they're encouraged to be. BBC series for children as young as 6 about transgender child taking hormone-blocking drugs. If kids aren't gender confused yet, they soon will be when this school is done with them. A policy of not being able to say boys and girls. Stop calling them boys and girls. Advisors who are paid £200,000 to help train teachers say using sex-specific terms in the classroom is unfair to transgenders. Nothing to do with that. It's confusing those who are not confused. Australia, schools banned from using the term mum and dad, and boys told to dress up as girls in non-gender specific free play. It's not free play if you make them do it. And the transgender bloody bathrooms, and here we have pediatricians in America talking about reckless profit-driven doctors prescribing children as young as 12 sex change hormones. They call it child abuse, but it is not specifically in its foundation terms about money. It's about changing the nature of the human form. I am non-binary. Well, unless we start realizing what this is really about, there will only be binary. On-off electrical charges of the computer system. And it was all described in 1932 by Aldous Huxley in Brave New World, who had access to this projection agenda that Orwell was tapping into in 1948 and Dr. Richard Day tapped into in 1969. Same thing. Natural reproduction, said Huxley, has been done away with, and children are created, decanted, and raised in hatcheries and conditioning centers. From birth, people are genetically designed to fit into one of 5 castes, which are further split into plus and minus members and designed to fulfill predetermined positions within the social and economic strata of the world state. That's what transgenderism and the synthetic human is all about, the non-gender synthetic human. This is the new maternity ward, unless the pennies start to drop of what this is really all about. And here we go with George Orwell, 1984, something similar. Already we are breaking down the habits of thought which have survived from before the revolution. We have cut the links between child and parent, and between man, and between man and woman. No one dares trust a wife or a child or a friend any longer, but in the future there will be no wives and no friends. Now, the Harvey Weinstein thing and the horrible abuse of women is one thing, but that was a trigger. It's a trigger which has led to parliaments, to other places, where genuine abuse of women has been pulled together with things that were just the wrong thing to say. When I was younger, not the wrong thing to say, it was just a bit of a laugh. But it's all been brought together. And what has that done? I'll describe what it's done. One British member of Parliament said, when this story broke, and of course the whole thing's gone into the British Parliament, it's gone into the American Congress and Capitol Hill. This MP said, "I will never hug a woman again, who basically is not my wife. I will always only shake hands with them." And what they are doing, and this is the trick again, they take genuine abuse and they highlight that, and they use that as the excuse to pan that out into all different areas of human interaction, which they all lob into this area of genuine abuse. And so men are frightened to say anything to women. Women and men are being pushed apart. Political correctness means people daren't say anything. They have to think, how do I put this? People are being pushed apart and divided, not just of group on group anymore, but individual on individual, sex on sex, exactly what this is describing. Children will be taken from their mothers at birth, as one takes eggs from a hen. The sex instinct will be eradicated. Procreation will be an annual formality. This is one step back from what Huxley was talking about. Like the renewal of a ration card. We shall abolish the orgasm. Our neurologists are at work upon it now. There will be no loyalty except loyalty towards the party. There will be no love except the love of Big Brother. And this transhumanist agenda, ain't it cool, man? It's being pushed by the mainstream media all over the world as a good thing. And this is the process that they've pulled people in on. They want to get in the body and connect the brain to AI. So you start with holdables, technology you can hold, smartphones, tablets. You get people addicted to them, brackets, achieved. A third of American babies now play with smartphones before they can walk and talk. The record numbers in hospital after walking into traffic. It's an addiction, digital heroin. Digital heroin, how screens turn kids into psychotic junkies. Half of families text each other in the same house. Experts say tech craze could have catastrophic effect on family life. What I've been saying through today, one of the major agendas is to destroy the family unit, to drive families apart, like men from women and all these other divisions. Why is it that technology like Siri, Office Assistants and from Apple and these others was seed funded by DARPA and seed funded by the CIA? 14 cutting-edge firms funded by the CIA. This coming through Silicon Valley, not from it. And then you go to stage 2. You've got them addicted to this. Now, wearables. You want to get in the body, but get on it first. So you have your Bluetooth and your Google Glass and your smartwatch. And your stitching circuitry into your shirt to get a better signal. Oh, God, beam me up, Scotty. It's mad down here, mate. One step from the microchip, the electronic tattoo, and then stage 3. And we're heading there now. We're going into it now. Implantables, get inside the body. When I was in Sweden, people were getting microchipped in Sweden. They're having parties to celebrate. Oh, Bill's getting microchipped. Let's have a party. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's very sensible. Let's celebrate the fact you're giving your mind away. Yeah, what a great thing to celebrate. US Navy discussed plans to fit humans with microchips and track their every move. I said in a book called And the Truth to Set You Free in the 1990s, I wrote it in 1994, that they would sell the microchip to parents by saying you'll never lose your child again if you get them microchipped. And they would say that we'll use the microchip to microchip people with mental health problems and people with Alzheimer's so you'll never lose them again. That's exactly what they're doing in America now, using those same excuses to justify microchipping children and old people. House passes bill allowing government to microchip citizens with mental disabilities. There we go. They are putting chips into drugs so that the doctor knows if you've taken them or not. And this is a process I've been writing about for years, where the plan is that the public is drugged by law. And if you don't take your drugs, they know. And they now have the technology to do that. Test patients' urine to make sure they're taking their medication, says new study. That's another aspect to it. So this is what it really means, the cool, brave world of implantables. This is what it really means, the end of humanity. At the end of this road, I started out with my iPad, then Google Glass and my Apple Watch, and onto the microchip. Then next came, oh, my sat-nav said this way. Ah, that's where it's go. Well done, you. This guy died in 1963. He had it stitched up because he had access to the projected agenda. Aldous Huxley, people will come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. This is an academic at Reading University in Britain called Kevin Warwick. Every time I see Kevin Warwick, I feel a deep depression. He's selling this transhumanist agenda, and he said, if a machine is passing down signals that keep you completely happy, then why not be part of the matrix? Well, I don't want to be you. That's why. Who am I? Whatever AI tells you are. This is what they want to do. Turn humans into them. And already the human brain has been rewired. They're turning humans literally into goldfish with the attention span of goldfish. This has been shown in studies. Because what they've found, they thought that when the brain was formed, that was it. It was formed, it don't change. They know different now, big time different. They talk about something called brain plasticity. And that is the brain changes the way it processes information, i.e. perception, on the basis of information received. So you change the information received, you'll change the way the brain operates, plasticity. So this bombardment of electrical digital stimulus that people, especially the young, are getting from this technology they're constantly on is changing, rewiring the brain. There have been many, many mainstream studies that have shown this and how it's destroying, for instance, like I say, attention spans. People can't read a book anymore because they can't concentrate for long enough. They're going to pick the phone up. When you see people, they're on the phone and they put it down and then they have to pick it up again. They can't leave it. Why? Because the brain has become addicted to that electronic stimulus and it goes into cold turkey when they put it down and have to pick it up again. This is what's happening. The transhuman generation, 1 in 5 teenage boys have best adventures on video games. What I said earlier about the creation of the world army to impose the will of the world government, that's not meant to be a human army eventually. It's meant to be an AI army. a robot army. The robot takeover, DARPA, Google have been involved in this, again, developing these robots to take over the military. So even the military will be controlled by AI. Killer robots will leave humans defenseless, says Professor. That's why it's being done. Again, that's what they're missing. First person killed by a police piece of technology in America. All these military technologies are being transformed into AI technologies where artificial intelligence is running the show and deciding what they do. The Pentagon wants drone swarms to support infantry, came out this week. US military to have more robot soldiers than humans by the year 2025. Robocops are coming to London. They're already in Dubai. They've got robot cops in Dubai. And what we're looking at, because the Matrix was so predictive, because whoever was behind it knew what was coming, you had the Sentinels, artificial intelligence machines controlling humans, everything. How do we get there? We cull the population. There's so many documents showing that they want to cull the population by enormous amounts. And indeed, Nick Rockefeller told Aaron Russo, as I said earlier, that there was going to be a dramatic reduction in the population. And if you're going to have in America anything like that, there has to be a massive reduction in the population. And one of the reasons that they are quite happy to do this is because of the AI takeover. They don't need humans like they have up to this point. Human jobs are disappearing in a fantastic speed because of AI. Chinese company replaces 90% of workers with robots. Robots could take over millions of jobs in the next 15 years. This is a bricklayer that lays bricks six times quicker than humans. They are doing AI farming, AI shepherds with drones in the sky. And they are bombarding the human immune system with endless sources of undermining its strength and its effectiveness, because this is part of the cull. And this is a massive part of the cull. What they're finding now is, and there was one that came out just a few months ago, maybe 2 months ago, there is a dramatic fall in sperm counts. And they say they don't know why. Well, it's part of the cull. It's part of reducing the human race. And another thing that's coming, affecting the cull is what's coming out of the sky, not least through aluminium. This is a report in Britain. Aluminium poisoning may trigger Alzheimer's disease, claims professor. Alzheimer's disease has gone through the frickin' roof since chemtrails started. This is another one. Dementia is now the leading cause of death in England and Wales. Well, where the hell has that come from? It's coming from the sky. Bees suffer dementia due to metal pollution. Aluminium contamination may be behind insect decline. It's coming from the sky. Also, all this radiation, GMO, vaccines, absolutely crazily, 74 vaccines in some countries before the age of 17, massively insane. The target of the vaccines is the human immune system. So we become open to other things, and this is why they want mandatory vaccinations, because people are starting to say, hold on a minute, I'm getting a bit concerned about these vaccines and what they're doing. Oh, well, it was your choice to have them. If you're making the choice not to have them, they're now becoming compulsory, because they're massively part of this whole process as well. And so we also have drugging the population. These are the most drugged young generations in human history. All part of the plan. I explained this in Everything You Need to Know. And again, Aldous Huxley was right there. In 1961, there will be, in the next generation or so, a pharmacological method of making people love their servitude and producing dictatorship without tears, so to speak, producing a kind of painless concentration camp for entire societies, so that people will, in fact, have their own liberties taken away from them, but rather enjoy it, because they will be distracted from any desire to rebel by propaganda or brainwashing enhanced by pharmacological methods. And this seems to be the final revolution. And that's massively part of what is happening on university and college campuses all over the world, and why the snowflake generation is being produced. And here we have the CIA documented from a paper that's come to light connected to MK Ultra. The CIA documented long-range planning for a drugged and debilitated society. This has been planned all along, and it's in the paperwork that this was the plan all along. And one other area, before I finish this section, is preemptive programming. You may notice that the world that I've just described is coming out in movie after movie after movie after movie. Why? It's something called preemptive programming. The world they want to take us into is so fantastically different to the world we've been in that there is a strong chance of people going, what's going on? What's happening? So what they've been doing is feeding us through movies and TV series the world they want to introduce. And what they're doing is making the subconscious and the conscious, but the subconscious particularly, familiar with that world through movies and television programs. And so as they bring that world in, as they are now, quicker and quicker, in reality, it's no longer quite as alien, quite as strange, quite as, whoa, what's happening, because of the programming that we've been put through. This is why these Hunger Games, Equilibrium, and all these movies, and of course the mainstream pushing transhumanism. And the idea is you put the preemptive programming into the subconscious mind, and it goes through to the conscious mind as a sort of familiarity with what would be very alien otherwise. That is what's happening. And all the time, the slaves are fighting the slaves for the slave owners as a total diversion of focus so that this can go on unchallenged while they're fighting over whether Trump should do this or Trump should do that. But is it a lost cause? It frickin' seems so, but no way it is. We are heading for this fascist dictatorship, but we can change direction. Because of the way reality works, we can change direction by changing ourselves. In the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. When we become the two-eyed, third-eyed man and woman, consciousness, then the game can change, and it can change very quickly. Because we're heading there. We could be here. It's just a choice, so we need to make it now. We can paint a better world. To understand how, we have to see the connection between perception and frequency, and thus how we change this world from what it is to what it can be, far faster than anyone can imagine who thinks this is a solid world of limitation. I'll be back in half an hour to talk about that. Thank you very much. Thank you.